What's up? What's up? Welcome back, everybody, to Actuali Podcast. I'm Chris,
I'm DJ.
and in this episode, we're going to be covering episode 9 of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. We're live on YouTube, we're live on Twitch.
We barely made it to broadcast time.
We did. We just made it.
Just made it.
All right, we're going live on Facebook now. What's up, Facebook fam?
How y'all doing today?
Welcome, everybody, back to our shared learning journey, this watch party where we get to enjoy John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis lectures. It's a 50-part series. It's absolutely groundbreaking, cutting-edge understandings of cognitive science, as well as the understanding of mindfulness practices such as meditation, deep contemplation, states of transcendence, what we call enlightenment. And, we get deep into all kinds of fun stuff, from shamans and psychedelics to the art of being attentive and understanding how our consciousness operates, and in doing so, understanding how we got to where we are today and how we may awaken from the meaning crisis that humanity is in now.
Our modal confusion.
Our modal confusion. Yes, that mistaken process wherein we take the having mode as something that can fulfill our being needs. So our having mode is when we identify something that we need for survival, for instance, like water, and so we know how to manipulate and control and utilize a cup. But then we have these being needs of belonging, of growth, of self-mastery, self-ascension, actualization, relationship growth, the development of artistic creations, and all these things come from this being need, this being mode that we have. So we have these two existential modes, having mode and being mode. And we are very easily marketed to by corporations that will take advantage of this psychology, understanding that they can cause us to mistake our having needs for being needs, and they can try and give us things that we think that by having them we're going to fulfill these other deep existential needs that we have of belonging and attraction and all of these other
And
growth processes and exploration.
and with our sciences and how we view the world, we can have all the knowledge of it. We have great images of Pluto and far off places, and we have the knowledge of atoms and how they work, but we're lacking in the being, and we don't have an understanding of meaning with this scientific. Well, I won't say all of us, but we, as a species right now, have become very science and secular.
Mm-hmm.
That does nothing. Well,
For our
very
for our
little
being needs,
for
very
the
little,
being
yeah,
and
for
growing.
fulfilling the being and
Because we're
growing
not really
needs.
growing. The more we're
The
learning.
need to self-transcend and to understand how to be in the world, how to operate in the
Yeah.
world, versus what is the world made of. Science is great for understanding how the
Yeah,
world is
yeah,
made,
and not
made
saying
of,
get rid of it,
how to
but
break
it's a
things
balance
down, put them
between the
back
two.
together, build and engineer new creations. But as far as our being need is concerned, we need to know how to be in the world. We need to understand the growth process that allows us to most ably engage as agents in the wider arenas that we find ourselves in. So how can we learn to conform better to reality as it is in through these existential modes, by being able to delineate between them and observe ourselves when we're mistakenly utilizing one in place of the other. So that allow mindfulness practices that allow us to transcend our mental processes and see them as they operate within ourselves, like the process of insight that we're going to learn about in this episode, allow us to transcend. So there's these transcending practices that allow us to better incorporate ourselves with reality.
And it seems I keep having this fleeting thought that keeps jumping into my head, and it just jumped right back out.
Well, we're looking for meaning, right? We're looking for, and Vervaeke described in the last episode.
It's about technologies.
Okay.
We've really developed our external technologies, the having technologies, like you have the Library of Alexandria in your pocket.
Mm-hmm.
But we've forgotten about the well, I won't say forgotten, but neglected the psychotechnologies that got us here.
Mm-hmm.
Because there has, our
Yes.
technology has expanded greatly and far is outpacing our psychotechnological growth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, far outpacing
now
our humanity.
there is some drag though, because like as technology goes, it kind of drags you with it. But
Mm-hmm.
the fact that
It's a good way to
deep
see it.
thinking and critical thinking skills and these things aren't taught in earlier education is a sign of that. You're taught how to functionally use a lot of things and use information to get a good career, do this, do that, have this, have that.
Right.
You have a career.
Mm-hmm.
But
we don't want to
but
confuse like that with the being, the sense of belonging, the sense
and
of
I don't think the
self-actualization,
the liberal
the development of a relationship.
And I don't think the liberal arts, like as in how like I love the liberal arts, like theater, music, all that stuff. But I think there needs to be something else that we need to develop a place that we can do the learning of this type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because like it's usually been like philosophy and other stuff like that and poetry. Put that in the liberal arts department, and all those hippie band kids and theater geeks can go hang out by themselves. But it shouldn't be that. It should be something else.
The discipline should be more interrelated.
And there are places, like there are professors that teach this stuff. But is like if you're, I don't know, if you're like a nursing major, are you going to go take that high level philosophy whatever class? Well, probably not, and you probably can't take it unless you take it as an elective. But it's like, and probably should, I won't say not have it institutionalized, but make it like what personal institutions, kind of something more like marriage,
but traditionalized.
Schools.
Yeah, so that there's like a natural teaching that runs through. So we've used myths for this for ages. And since now we're deconstructing everything in this phase of deconstruction and super construction, we've taken apart the old myths, the old wisdom stories that were perennial, as Vervaeke put it, that help reveal recurring patterns and tell us how to live now in these times. And many of those stories directly relate to times of civilizational and broad social collapse. And they help us understand how to navigate through times like these. So being able to tap back in and see these things, as these myths, as very wise, not just simple parables with moral stories, but deep wisdom about how to live through even the hardest of times, not just for the individual, but even for the larger collective, are very helpful to us. So in the process of our deconstruction, I hope that we're not throwing too much out in the process.
We definitely don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
I was about to say, don't throw the bath out with the baby water, and I was like, it doesn't make sense.
The bath out with the baby water.
Dyslexia. There we go.
Oh yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah, you just reminded me of Deus Ex. The idea of the God and the machine, and that old PC game Deus Ex, which was a classic.
That game was so good.
That's a whole other podcast for you guys.
Oh man, yeah, like a playthrough of that. If we can find one of the old CD-ROMs of that.
I got to remember this guy's YouTube channel where he has these deep existential philosophical expositions going on while showing some of the great classic games, as he's just kind of like journeying through the beauty of the different worlds, and it's various things from Red Dead to Deus Ex and games like that.
Yeah, games are a great way to encode messages and ideas. And I don't
mean
like,
man. Yeah,
I don't mean like
story.
Messages, but like like you got a message. This is what the story's going through. But also the mythic end of it. You know, like or at least
it's like we leave clues for each other out there.
Well, that's the point of art.
Manage. Yeah, that's
art is to encode ideas into you through your senses.
Mm-hmm.
So when you do it visually, you call it photography or painting or sculpting or something like that. Like if you look at old paintings, there's information in those paintings.
Mm-hmm.
Even cave paintings, it's a set of information. Like these animals exist here. There was this many people here.
Mm-hmm.
And then music encodes it with poetry to music. Well, poetry if you have the lyrical aspect of it, but Yeah, and then you have video games like Deus Ex. Like Deus Ex, if you ever get the chance to play it, talk to everybody as long as you can.
Go through all the different possibilities, and
And
there's a lot of different playthrough styles.
oh,
That was kind of the first
peaceful.
game that really fleshed out, like you could have that kind of thief style. What do you call
that game
that?
was good too. Yeah,
That was a good game
you
too.
could totally be a ninja and not kill anybody except for the one guy that you have
You
to
could
kill.
choose to be totally,
Yeah,
to not murder anybody the entire
yeah,
time.
you
can
just
put
use little
people to
trank
sleep
things and zap them, or
yeah,
you know.
yeah. Or you could just sneak around them. You can hack.
Now, when it came to robots, though, I blew them things up. I didn't play around. Those
They
are
were
robots.
dangerous.
Oh yeah.
They were worse than the humans.
Oh man, yeah.
Except for the cyber humans, like your guy was. Yeah, that guy had to face a lot of existential issues.
Well, sure, he was from inside the machine, and through
Yeah.
you looking out what his brother was doing.
And then the species that we were going through this deep crisis.
Oh
Depicted. It's a good dystopian story. Basically, a good. If you've ever read 1984 or Brave New World or anything like that, dystopian
Or gotten into any
stories,
of, like, you know,
great
conspiracy
sci-fi
theories.
that, they help prepare us for the future. They wrestle with deep psychological and philosophical conundrums in a story set in a different environment that is detached enough, but yet familiar enough for us to be able to see ourselves through it.
And I guess it was like episode 1 or episode 2. We went over flow state induction mechanisms or something like that induce the flow state. Well, video games are one of those things.
Absolutely.
So then you add a story narrative to it.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, you know, we're drawn to video games, and we like video games. Might as well like make something that, you know, teaches you how to think outside the box.
It's another art form, that's for sure. Well, the Zelda games were always good for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just had the fairy
Zelda,
that was just like,
Metroid.
hey, over here. And you're like, I don't understand. You just keep circling this thing, and I don't
It's
know
funny
what
how
to do.
addicted we are to problem solving
Yeah.
as humans, that we can make games like this, and they're super challenging. You have to do the same thing over and over and over again sometimes because that part is so hard. Yet we are super drawn to that optimization process. Makes us feel good. And I think we're getting that positive feedback because the biology knows this is going to help me be attuned to survival. If I'm optimizing my ability to be attentive in complex, difficult moments, then that's good for my long-term life existence. So it's, you get this positive feedback. And that's really cool how that's built into us. So it feels actually it feels very good to go through this series because it's, rather than turning away from the great existential crises within ourselves and occurring in the wider world, it's a direct facing of it, but it's a deep consideration too. And it's allowing us to kind of seat ourselves in this moment and patiently, though accurately, respond. And
That's an optimistic way of looking at it.
Yeah, we need all the optimism we can get. And there is a certain kind of hard won post naive and post cynicism mode of hope as an orientation to life, as an action that we can take. I believe you can look at everything and then you can see the great shadows that humanity possesses, again within our own selves and then in the wider world, and as they manifest in the wider world, how unsettling that can be. I do very much, I know we've spoken of this previously, feel that this is probably fundamental to the anxiety so many people are experiencing in the world right now.
Yeah.
That we feel that our species is at a interesting place. We're building towards
Well,
some kind of climax, or we're at a peak moment of our story, and it's definitely a point where there seems to be different directions that we can go, and we really want to choose which direction we go from here.
Whether or not we're, directly conscious of it, we're still responding, physically, mentally, spiritually to those circumstances.
Right.
To this crunch, whatever this is, but also like expanding out. And I'd venture to say that the negative expressions of discontent and just general craziness and all this stuff is a symptomatic result of feeling it without being able to
Feeling that
look at it
disconnect.
and define it
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
talk about it, you know,
Sure.
because like if you,
Yeah,
know,
that causes stress.
if you can see
in
the wave
system.
coming,
Yeah.
it's great. You know, you can dive into it or ride it. But like if you can't even see that there's water there, but
There's
you
just
feel
the
this thing
shadow.
pulling you into it, and it's just getting darker.
Yeah, it's just getting darker. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
And you can kind of, it's there, but you don't really want to look at it enough to understand it entirely.
yeah,
I think a lot of us have been in that mode,
mm.
and that's happened, and that's natural. That's natural.
Well,
Animals
sure.
do this too.
You know, when something's coming to get you, like, and
It's like need time to compute. Need time to compute.
yeah,
Pause.
just
need time
or
to compute.
just get away
This
from
is
it.
moving so fast.
Just
We
get
are-
away
we are
from it.
accelerating technologically in our capacity, and then our danger to ourselves as well and to the planet. Whatever one believes about global warming, for instance, we do definitely know that we are poisoning our oceans. We're poisoning our soil. Can't drink out of the rivers and the streams anymore. We got to be better stewards of this great miracle, this great gift that we've been given, that we call life. We still don't even know what it is.
And we also have
so that's where we need these wisdom traditions that help give us a root and an understanding.
Well, we need to be that.
They got to be imaginative and creative.
Well, we need to be malleable enough to
They don't
also
need to be
shift
exactly
with the
accurate.
shift with the natural changes of the universe as well, and constantly rising to a higher level of understanding is one of those things that helps you become malleable, because you can see more of the picture and move around and maybe see on the horizon that, like, in the next 10 years, you know, this area will be a little bit drier or a little bit wetter, or, you know,
The only way
where
to play
are
on
we
that
going to move
edge,
our people?
right?
It's no wonder the medicine man and other, you know, high level thinkers within the, you know, the tribes and groupings of people were the ones consulted with, like, where are we going, in conjunction with the people who go out in the field and see things.
Because they practiced all kinds of different techniques,
constantly
of allowing them to reframe
you know,
their perception of existence.
and see the causative, you know.
And there's so much to this
effects
great
of
mystery that if you can play on the periphery, and the only way to do that is with your imagination, you do come out with very dreamlike symbolism, and that's why our myths are so full of that kind of deep, strange allegory. And that's why stories are so powerful for us. Even though we can do fictionalized stories with animals talking, it still can be meaningful to us because it's helping us orient into how to live.
What do you mean animals
But there's so
talking?
much
That's
unknown. We don't
absurd.
know how the universe began. We don't know how far it goes. We don't know if there's other life out there, yet though we know there's trillions of stars with planets probably just like our own in many places. At least in a habitable zone, not just like our own, but gosh, I mean, there's enough stars, there's enough room out there that there could be some almost weird similarities,
There's the potential,
and then vast changes and differences.
there's the potential, which is one of the words that we learned. Like,
Yeah, we get
you know,
that from Aristotle.
Yeah, and then there's the potential for life out there. Unfortunately for us, like, we can't say for sure if there is until we see it act. So until we see it act and know what it actually is, we don't know. But the potential's there.
Yeah.
There's definitely the potential. Actually,
And how to be in a world like this. We've come up with some really powerful characters and archetypes for demonstrating how we can do that.
Well,
and then these transcendent ideals that we can live up to that are beyond our comprehension, yet we know it's better than whatever goodness we've seen in the world, that there must be more out there because of how limitless existence in fact seems to be to us.
Well, yeah, and
So how do you describe that, but with a story, with a myth?
well, the universe has primed itself to exist like us, well, as us. Well, we have myths about the creation of the universe as well. I wonder if there's like I know it wouldn't be like a one-to-one, but you know how we have myths as thinking creatures as reflecting, but what are the myths of, you know, the cosmos, the universe? Like what would the equivalent be? Because there are things that draw things together or blow them apart, or take different types of matter, combine it to make other things. You know, from the births of stars to the
ancient
deaths.
Taoist story about the forces of chaos and order.
I know it's absurd, but what are the myths that the universe has created for itself to make this?
That's an interesting thought.
I don't really have an answer for it, but it's something to ponder. help break the framing a little bit. You know, it is absurd because it's like, well, the universe isn't a thinking thing. Well, I tend to think it's doesn't think like us. When you exist on the frame of billions
It's
of years,
omnipresent. It always has been and always will be. So it seems, because it's timeless. There's a point where it began, but that's when time and space begin. And what was before that? And was there a before that? Could there be a before that?
oh,
And if it's always been, then and it's omnipresent, and time is something that burst out.
I think it's a scaling of not just size, but like speed of time, and by that I mean rate of decay. Um,
It seems
So-
that
Here,
it's
let me get through this though. So you have the Big Bang Theory, so everything was just one thing. Well, that is the limit of our ability to measure that point, that small, like the smallest point one can measure is the Planck length. It's the smallest of the small of the small. Well, what's inside that? Well, the whole universe was inside that at
Mhm.
one point in time. So the universe is also inside of something that we think of as really, 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 really big. And we can't even see the outer edge of our universe because there hasn't been enough time for the light at the edge of our universe to get here.
yeah, the really bigness that the universe is in is actually the universe
So it seems
itself
like at any point,
expanding, and this nothingness and a void, the perfect void that has no space and time. We don't know.
but is it really a void? Like,
It's-
the void says there's
it's a
nothing there,
void
but it doesn't be.
That must be so perfectly empty that it has room for every potentiality. You know, it's the paradoxical nature of this thing that we would call God, this generative, organizing, and destructive force all at once.
Interestingly enough, in the universal projections that I've seen, there's something called the Great Attractor and the Great. It's not the Great Repeller, but there's I think two other forces that are pushing, like galaxy clusters away, and then there's another force that's sucking galaxy clusters in.
Yeah, right.
But I think it's so we're right in the middle of those 2 points. We're right in the middle of those. So absolutely big.
And
it
they
is the
previously,
entire-
recently, I think, potentially disproved the Big Bang Theory now, so it's a whole wide open game at
well,
this point.
yeah, and so when I think of the Big Bang, it's
Once
just
again.
it's the Big Bang is the
There's some discovery recently in physics where they've pretty much disproved that it must not have happened that way. The expansion of the universe
Yeah.
we thought
Oh,
we were
yeah.
recording isn't happening the way
yeah.
we thought it was.
It's probably more of a
Everything isn't tracing back the way we thought. So
but it's probably more of a breathing thing. But I could
maybe
I could
I've heard that analogy. I like that.
I could still.
But I like the idea also. So basically, to get us back to how we got here was, I think the thing can have a personality, and it has always been and always will be, and it's also at the same time begin as nothing and is learning about itself through the growth of universes and through beings like us that reflect back upon itself. And it's doing both of those at the same time. It always has been and always will be, and it's also the story of becoming at the same time.
I guess like how we interact with or how interactions in the universe happen is a scaling thing. So to us, an atom is very small, but the space between an electron and an atom, relatively speaking, is unfathomably huge. Empty spaces in between the two.
Mm-hmm.
So a type of awareness and intelligence that can't even necessarily like see us, even with its greatest technologies, just as we can't see quarks or whatever makes up the components of atoms. What's that difference? Like, how do we even measure
It's at
awareness at that level?
It's at once the ability for it to be everything that always has been and always will be, but also to simultaneously forget and live a trillion lives at once.
I think it's just all at one
It's all
size and everything. And then as we move
Yeah,
through
you're
it,
right. I
we're
like
going
that.
in and out of it.
I like that, yeah.
And so, of course, we thought
That's
the Big
similar to
Bang
the
because we're looking in and we're like,
The Kabbalist's way of delineating between these different levels of transcendence or the ultimate, all the way up to the ultimate, and these levels of awareness.
these higher
and
states
realms,
of
states
understanding
of being, and realms
and
of being,
consciousness. And, there's like, in order to think like a galaxy, you have to release yourself into the galaxy. Well, I don't know about you. But I
Hinduism
can't
breaks
do
it down
this,
this
but
way
you can
as
do
well,
it with
yeah.
psychedelics, meditations, other things,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you can practice it getting bigger and bigger and bigger in your, and then start thinking in larger scales, or even into
the tiniest
smaller
scale.
scales.
Well, it's the back and forth
Yeah.
process of that is actually the process of non-duality.
Yeah.
Techniques like meditation. It's
Yeah.
truly, it's not just going in, it's out and in at the same time. And it's back and forth.
Until
And
eventually,
this is why, there's so many chants and there's so many methods of meditation that involve deeply an understanding of how breath works. And I just lost my train of thought. I had another one that was in my head
Gotcha.
that had to do with, okay, I'm losing it. That means it's time to get into the episode, I think.
Yeah.
We can probably catch you guys up a little bit, but Vervaeke is going to do a good job of that. So we know that we're going to talk about sati, which was to bring into mind, to remember a mode of being.
Yeah.
And so it's remember in a very deep sense of the word.
Yeah. So last week was the sati, which is the participatory to remember.
Yeah,
like
the wake up kind of remembering.
Yeah.
Participatory. Yes.
And then we'll be going into the pasana, which is the insight. Actually, I think this episode is insight, and like he'll sum it up better than we can for the most part. I pretty much got the same points.
Yes, so basically in India during this time of the Axial Revolution, while it was going on in Greece and India, there was these new psychotechnologies that were coming about, in addition to the development of language and literacy and coinage and understandings of simple mathematics, that were changing the ways that we frame the world as cultures, as whole peoples. We then begin to, in the East, develop these mindfulness practices, and not mindfulness TM as it's often depicted and learned about. And nowadays it's been a little bit over marketed, but in the term of actual true meditation, in the sense of true meditation. So they developed these psychotechnologies, these technologies of such as various yogas and meditative disciplines to allow us to cultivate an awakening from the meaning crisis, to allow us to reawaken and recover our sense of beingness and avoid modal confusion by recognizing the difference between our being and having modes. And yeah, I think that's a good enough summation. Do you have anything to add to that?
I don't know. It's a soft vigilance. Vigilance. It's intimate contact. The not too hard, not too soft. So like the last episode, he visited again on the musicians on the river, and the masters being like, well, too tight is not good, and too loose is not too good. You have to have the point. So
the Buddha discovering the middle path.
Yeah,
was his
instead
awakening.
And up into him discovering that he was still doing all these things within the have, which is like still having himself, but trying to make himself.
And going into asceticism and self-denial.
Yeah.
He was actually still framing the idea
on
the idea of having a self.
Yeah.
Which was an illusion.
Yeah.
The sense of self that we have, this psychological self-image that we develop over our lives is not who we are. It's just a set of descriptive factors, and it's in fact something that we also act through, but is malleable.
Yeah.
So, and that's helpful to be able to see, because we're not pulled around by our minds so much. We can watch and see the mind and actually utilize our thinking in a much different way, to where it's not something that is causing emotional reactions within ourselves that then we get into these recursive trains of thought repeating over and over, and increase our suffering, our sense of anxiety. And
it's concentration, but the right kind of concentration.
Yes. So the practice of soft vigilance, not just paying attention, but being attentive, you could say. So utilizing a soft vigilance to consistently renew interest as the mind starts to think again in the process of, for instance, meditation. You use the soft vigilance just to return to the being mode, to being present, to feeling the sensations of sight and sound around you. So it's about tuning in, getting into an inter-essay, being very interested with what we're attending to.
And it's something you can practice, and practice is optimization.
Yes. This helps the world become increasingly brighter and more salient to us. And we can coordinate these various elements in unison, and that's the process of worldview attunement. And so how does that give us improved insight and help us develop insight and mindfulness practices is what we're going to learn now. How is that actually working cognitively? So yeah, let's jump on in, guys.
It's gonna be a fun episode.
This is a great episode.
I like this one. There's a lot of this going on.
Yeah, this is where I texted him the other day and I was like, this is where it starts to get good. And I was like, I mean, it's already good, but really, he's filled us in now and everything that we need to know so that he can get us into this territory now, and we're going to start going deeper. It's exciting, fun stuff. All right, so here we go. Episode 9 of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. So last time we continued looking through the myth of Siddhartha's awakening, and we talked about him leaving the palace, the having mode, his attempt to recover the being mode, and the difficulty he faced in pursuing self-denial as passionately as he had pursued self-indulgence, and why this ultimately failed, because it's still working within the same operation of trying to have a self. And then we looked at Siddhartha's commitment to the middle path, an attempt to overcome that through the cultivation of mindfulness, and then we began our exploration of mindfulness. We first looked at what it meant, sati. It's this deep remembering, this recovering of the being mode that leads to a fundamental transformation and alleviates the existential anxiety and distress that Siddhartha was experiencing and potentially is on offer for us. And then we started to take a look at that, the practice of mindfulness and its attempt to address at least an individual or personal experience of a meaning crisis. And we were doing that because we were trying to investigate more broadly the mindfulness revolution and how that is a response to the meaning crisis within the West. We began by noting that the study of mindfulness is misleading in some ways, the scientific study, because it begins with a feature list. And as we've noted multiple times, feature lists leave out the IDOS, the structural functional organization. In order to do that, we brought out 4 sort of central characteristics in the feature list: being present, not judging, insightfulness, and reduced reactivity or an increased equanimity. And then we noted that what we need to do is to make distinctions between the types of features, between those that are states that we can engage in, actions we can perform, and traits we can cultivate. Once we did that, we opened up the possibility of asking causal questions. How can the practice of being present, for example, produce the trait of insightfulness? And then we also could ask constitutive questions. What's the relationship, the part-whole relationship, for example, between being present and not judging? That being said, we then also noted that we have to replace the language of training with the language of explaining. They operate according to different principles and for different goals. And we began that by starting to ask, what does it mean to be present? And then we talked about concentration. We talked about different senses of that and the kind of soft vigilance that's actually conducive of insight, discussed by Alan Langer and others. This kind of involvement that is very much about conforming to, inter-esse, becoming deeply interested, connected to the structural functional organization of something. We noted that took us into discussion of paying attention, and all the while remembering this idea that we got from Siddhartha Gautama, the story about tuning, getting the right tuning, optimization. And we started to talk about attention, and made the argument that attention is not very well served by the spotlight metaphor. While that metaphor does give us the idea of attention altering salience, the metaphor misses a lot of what attention is doing. We began to investigate what's missing by making use of Christopher Moll's idea that attention is not a direct action you perform by walking, but it's something you do by modifying something else, by optimizing something else. That's why you can successfully pay attention by doing many disparate and different kinds of things. You can pay attention by optimizing your seeing into looking, by optimizing your hearing into listening, by optimizing your seeing and listening into a coordinated tracking of what somebody is saying, like you're doing right now. All of those are different ways in which we're paying attention. So what we needed was an understanding of attention that could capture the way it's an optimization strategy, which lines up with its tuning idea, and how such optimization might be linked to a response to existential modal confusion and the alleviation of the suffering found therein. So I want to continue that discussion about attention and start to point towards what might be going on. If you remember, Moll talks about this idea of cognitive unison, getting a bunch of processes to share a goal, to be coordinated together in some fashion. Now he leaves it abstract like that, and I think we should try and investigate a little bit more further, more concretely, what that might mean. And there's a lot. Attention is one of the hottest areas in cognitive science right now. There's a lot of good work done by Frank Wu, by Sebastian Watzel, Christopher Moll. Just many people are talking about this, and I'm not pretending to canvas all of that rich and very fertile and very like it's very creative. It's advancing. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to pick up on some key themes here, because what we want to understand is how can mindfulness train attention so as to cause more insight, to make one more dispositionally capable of insight. Because after all, and we've talked about this before, when we're talking about wisdom, we're not talking about an individual insight. We're talking about a systematic set of insights that are mutually related to a fundamental transformation of the person's, as we said last time, existential mode. So let's talk a little bit more again about what's missing from the model of attention. So this cognitive unison, I think we can make use of another important cognitive scientist, philosopher, scientist who did work on attention, and that's Michael Polanyi. And he pointed out that attention has an important structure, and we've been trying to follow the Platonic idea of turning the feature list into a feature schema, picking up on structures. And the way, in order to bring out what Polanyi is talking about, I'm going to run through an experiment with you, an experiment you can sort of follow along with me. So let me describe it to you first. I need you to get some object like a pencil or a pen, and we will call that your probe. Nothing untoward is meant by that. That's just what it's called in psychology. It doesn't involve any aliens doing graphic things to your body or anything like that. So what we're going to do is, let me describe it to you first. Okay, what I'm going to ask you to do is going to ask you to find some object that you could put on a desk in front of you or hold in your hand. And then you're going to do the following. Do not start yet, because I want to describe it to you. I'm going to ask you to tap on the object as if you were blind, and you're trying to figure out what the object is. Its shape, its structure, its weight, its density. Oh, that's a cup, right? That makes sense. Now, it's important now you should close your eyes as you're doing this. I'm using touch because touch is slower than sight. And so you can become more aware of what's happening. Now, it's important while you do this that you continue tapping. So I'm going to ask you in a moment to close your eyes, start the tapping, and then while you're doing it, continue the tapping as you are following my instructions. And this will give you a sense of what you're doing. Okay, so what I want you to do is close your eyes. You start tapping on your object, right? Start tapping until you start to form an image of the object in your mind. Okay, so your eyes are closed. You're starting to get an image of what that object is in your mind. Okay, so right now you're aware, like you're focally aware. What you're focusing your awareness on is the object. I want you to keep tapping, but I want you to shift your awareness into your probe. Feel how your pencil or your pen is moving around, shifting. Okay, keep tapping, and then I want you to shift your awareness into your fingers and feel how your fingers are moving around, shifting around. Okay? Some of you may be able to pick up on the individual feelings that are occurring in your fingers. Now, go back, feel your fingers and your thumb, how they're moving. Now feel how the probe is moving. and now allow the tapping to reveal the object to you once again. So I've done this multiple times with people. And what's interesting is the following thing. Most people find this very readily easy to do. And a couple things. When you're initially tapping, for example, I was aware of my cup, but then my awareness moves into my marker, and then my awareness moves into my finger. And when my awareness is in my finger, I'm not aware of the cup at all. Then I was able to reverse it. I go from being aware of my fingers to being aware of the probe to being aware of the cup. You're saying, well, what's all this about? What's going on? Well, there's an important structure. Let's take a look at it step by step. So here's the cup, or whatever your object was, right? And I'm tapping on it with my probe, okay? Now here's the interesting thing. It's not like I was completely unaware of my probe, because if I was completely unaware of it, I couldn't manipulate it. But I wasn't actually aware of it. I was aware through it. I was aware through my probe of the cup. So I'm aware through this, and I'm aware of this. So it's like my probe is transparent to me. And let me give you an analogy right now, where this is opaque. Right? Here's the analogy. And think about, and we talked about this before, but let's do it again. And it's like my glasses are like my framing, right? My glasses are transparent to me in the sense that I'm looking through them, beyond them, by means of them. They're transparent to me. But what I can do is I can redirect my awareness so that I'm now looking at my glasses rather than through them. So my glasses have now become opaque to me. So I can do a transparency to opacity shift. Now what does that ability to shift indicate? Well, this is part of Polanyi's idea. Here's my probe. I'm aware through my probe. He has what I call a subsidiary or an implicit awareness. Because I'm aware through it. I'm not aware of it. I'm aware through it, right, of my focal object, for example, my cup. And this, I have a focal awareness or an explicit awareness. Now his point, which is really quite good, right, is that attention is this kind of structuring phenomena. What it is, it's always attention, as he says, from to. It's an attention through subsidiary awareness into focal awareness. When I'm paying attention, I'm doing this. But here's the interesting thing. I was then able to step back and make this focal, right? And now it's my fingers that I'm aware through my fingers of my probe. And then I can even step back and be aware of my feelings, what some people would call sensations. So I can keep stepping back and stepping back. So I'm looking at the cup through my probe. Now I'm looking through my fingers at the probe, and now I'm looking through my feelings at my fingers. And of course, the whole time I was actually looking at the cup, I was doing all of that. I was looking through my feelings, through my fingers, through my probe, into the cup. And you see, the spotlight metaphor is missing all of that layered, recursive, dynamic structuring that's going on. And notice you can move in both directions. You can do a transparency opacity shift, in which I step back more and more into my mind, or I can go the opposite way. I can do an opacity to transparency shift. That's when you went the opposite way. That's when you go from looking at your fingers to looking through your fingers at your probe, and going from looking at your probe to looking through your probe to the cup. And your attention is doing that all the time, flowing in and out, doing a transparency and opacity shifting. Now, that's very important, because that's an important, what you're seeing is how many different processes are being coordinated, integrated together to optimize and prioritize, to use an important term from Watzel, this particular object or this particular scene or situation. So that's one way in which attention is operating. Now, for reasons I'm not quite sure of, I think it has to do something with we're using a visual metaphor and the way vision is oriented in our bodies. We tend to use an in-out metaphor for this. Like that's why I'm using stepping back and looking at as opposed to like looking through. Notice also something that's really important for where we're going to need this when we talk about gnosis and participatory knowing. Notice when I was, if you'll allow me, when I was knowing the cup through the probe, I'm indwelling the probe, right? It's not like I'm, right? I'm participating in how the probe is being with respect to the cup. I'm sort of indwelling it. I'm not knowing the probe, I'm knowing through the probe. I'm inter-esse. I'm so deeply interested that I'm actually, right, integrated with it and through it into the cup. The way my vision is integrated with these glass lenses so that I'm actually seeing through them and by means of them. Now the point about this, and we've talked about this before, of course, is this also works not with just technology, but with psychotechnologies. We talked about this with second order thinking. You can so integrate literacy, for example, into your cognition that you don't look at literacy very much, you automatically look through it. And we'll come back to that.
All right, we're back.
Oh boy.
So he did a really good summary of our last episode, and if you guys missed that, it's definitely worth checking out. It'll help catch you up to now. And the mindfulness revolution spawned so much of, well, everything, our understanding and our interaction with reality and the development of these psychotechnologies that allow us to awaken and transcend these modes of being. So we're recognizing now that attention is an optimization process. It's structurally organizing reality for us so that we can best optimize and prioritize the various scenes, objects, and situations we're enacting. And
and I guess we went over the limitation of the spotlight metaphor, which is like your brain just looks at a thing and it looks at another thing, and the probe example. So
I really like that.
You go
That's
from
really cool experiment.
object, probe, hand, sensation,
Yeah.
and then you can work your way even further back.
Yeah, you can get a genuine image of something in your head just by tapping on it. And then you can recognize the awareness of the actual probe itself. Then you can have the awareness of the actual movement, the fingers movement, and then you can even notice the sensations in your fingers. Which you can keep going back and back and forward and forward.
Which is not how the spotlight
metaphor
works.
Yeah, it doesn't quite describe the whole thing. You're not just aiming light on something. You're seeing through things as well, like he said, through his glasses.
Well, through this example, we've learned that we have a what do you call it? The implicit,
implicit awareness and subsidiary.
And then you have your focal awareness. So your focal awareness, if you're thinking about the probe, is the probe.
Yes.
And then you can learn about the cup through the probe.
Yes.
And that's this.
And then you have the explicit awareness.
Yeah. So the implicit subsidiary awareness is a secondary reaction. You can think of it as the secondary reaction.
Well, the subsidiary is the secondary ones, right?
That's what I'm saying. But implicit is the subsidiary.
Oh, that's
awareness.
Right. Is the subsidiary?
Is the subsidiary.
And
then the focal awareness is the spotlight, but it's not just the spotlight.
So it's through subsidiary into focal, into sensations that he described,
or vice versa,
or the other way
as well.
Awareness is always doing this in and out. Then you could say. So it's got this layered dynamical structure to it. It's doing both of these at the same time, too. It's how we can read.
It's the transparency opacity shift is the term he used, and I like that, because as you're shifting from probe to hand to sensation, each piece becomes transparent. Well, as you move through like say if you're at the probe becomes transparent or opaque, depending on
where you're at, or it becomes the thing that you're indwelling. Like you drive a car.
But if you move yourself back, other things has to become more opaque or transparent as you go as well. So it's a shifting through, and you can you could even imagine doing it like that at the same time. It must be.
So it's this participatory dance.
Well, and you can
The
find
attention's always engaged in participatory knowing, as Vervaeke describes it.
and as you go, like, say, further in, you become blind to the object itself that you're hitting against. You know, like, you know, when I'm playing an instrument, for the most part, I'm kind of blind of the instrument. Yes, it's in my hands, and the muscle memory is doing the thing, but there's so much else going on. Like, you know, thinking about the order of the song, there's lyrics coming up. What are the lines with that? You know, okay, let's not rush it too much. Let's, you know, doing all that stuff, keeping track of a whole bunch of stuff, not even aware of.
Right. Yeah. And then if
You
there's
know.
like a complicated part, you need to focus on the instrument. You can do that.
Well, and it's actually a problem when you become aware of the instrument you're playing.
Right. Well,
Yeah,
if you're
it'll
trying
mess
to
you
stay
up,
in the
you
flow
know.
state,
Yeah.
you need to learn how to be able to move through the different levels of attention without it tripping you up.
Yeah, and
And so it's very,
And at the
very
same-
helpful to
well,
practice
it's-
these
yeah.
self-transcendence techniques that allow you to just kind of like watch the thing from above while it's happening more and more. Yeah.
music's a good thing. That's why everybody should
Great training for
at
flow,
least at
absolutely.
least try to figure out how to sing or play some instrument, even if it's an egg shaker.
Yeah, it comes naturally to us.
It's good practice. It's fun. You can do it with your friends, and if it's even more fun when you do, like.
And
you know.
we feel like only half a human without that creative output. I feel like it's
Yeah.
natural for every child, and at some point it
Da,
kind of
da, da,
fades
da,
away.
da, 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 da,
But
da,
but
da.
everyone is definitely into drawing and coloring and all that stuff, and in Play-Doh and everything. When you're a kid, like, we're creative, and it's, you know, inventing, whether it be starting a business, or it's also, you know, it's how we dress, it's how we act, it's everything that we do is creative. And so just embracing that and bringing more creativity into life is very enriching. It certainly generates meaning. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's pretty much that. As far as I got on my notes, I got some fun little bad drawings, but that's about it. It makes sense to me.
You know, when I was a kid, like, the borders of every
Oh yeah,
one of my
yeah.
notebooks was covered in art everywhere, all the time.
Well, actually, if you look at, like, you know, like old texts and stuff like that, they tend to put art all in the margins too. So,
Right.
but they were professional doodlers.
Yeah.
You know, they were
that's-
scribes and, you know, scholars.
For me, it was like the freedom around the forced learning process where I was right in the middle. It's okay. I can draw a little bit here. All right, guys. Well, let's jump back into it.
Yes.
Episode 9 of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis.
All right, so this is, right, as I said, this seems to be, people talk about this metaphorically as moving in and out with their awareness. So one of the ways attentions work is it moves in and out. You can, right, look through a lot of processing deeply out into the world, or you can step back and look at a lot of processing and withdraw towards the center of your mind. There's another important axis upon which your attention is working, and I can bring it out by a famous example, right? So you give this to people and you ask them to read it, and they say, what does it say? And they'll say, the cat. And they're like, oh yeah, right? And then you point out to them that they're reading this as an H, and they're reading this as an A, and these are exactly the same thing. Why are you reading one as an H and the other as an A? And so what they'll typically say to you is, well, because it fits in with this word as an H, and it fits in with this word as an A. So let's use language we've already developed. The letters are the features, and the word is the gestalt, the overall structure. Now notice here, you've got a problem. It's almost, you know, a pseudo-Zen problem. In order to read the words, I must read each individual letter, but in order to disambiguate each letter, I must have read the whole word. Therefore, reading is impossible. Now, of course, reading isn't impossible, which means something else has to change. What has to change is your model of attention. The searchlight metaphor, the spotlight metaphor, can't address that problem. Here's what your attention is actually doing. It's simultaneously going up from the features to the gestalt, the eidos, the structural functional whole, and it's going down from the gestalt, the words, to the individual letters, the features. It's simultaneously doing that. Your attention is also doing this. So not only is your attention flowing in and out, right, doing transparency, opacity, shifting, It's also flowing up and down between feature and gestalt. Your attention is doing all of that, and it's doing it right now. And the spotlight metaphor doesn't capture any of that. And mindfulness has to do with making use of all of this complex, dynamical, remember what dynamical systems are, dynamical processing. These are dynamic, self-organizing processes, and they can be optimized. And mindfulness optimizes them in some way. So, I'm going to put something up on the board. It looks like a graph, but it's not a graph because it doesn't have absolute position. It's just a schema because it has relative position. So when I move this way, like we were talking about when we were talking about Polanyi's work, I'm doing transparency to opacity shifting. And going this way is to do transparency to opacity, and to go this way is to do opacity to transparency. It's not no position is transparent and the other is opaque. It's always the direction that matters. The more I move this way, the more I'm stepping back and looking at. The more I go this way, the more I'm indwelling and looking out into the world. Then we have this. I can be going down from the gestalt to the features, using the word to decide the letters, for example, and I can be going up from the features to the gestalt. Nothing is inherently a feature. Look, the letters are a feature in the word, but the word is a feature in the sentence. Nothing is absolutely a feature. It's always relative. That's why I'm putting these double arrows. This isn't a Cartesian graph. Okay, this is not a Cartesian graph. This is a schema. But one thing you should know is that although I can describe and you can understand these two axes independently, they're almost always operating in a highly dynamic, integrated fashion. Very often, as I'm moving towards a gestalt, grabbing a bigger picture, I'm using that bigger pattern to look more deeply into the world. So often, I'm doing this. I'm grabbing bigger patterns and I'm using those deeper patterns to look deeper into the world. Right? So when you find, this is what we do in science, for example. I find this and this and this, I get a pattern, and then I find a way to integrate it together, and then I use that pattern to look more deeply in the world. This is what this is, right? I found a pattern, and it allows me to look more deeply into the world. I'm no longer looking at these individual things, force, mass, and acceleration. I've integrated them together, and that allows me to look more deeply into the world. Often, when we're stepping back and looking at our minds, our awareness processes within attention, we're also often breaking up gestalts into features. For example, you were breaking up your experience of your whole finger into individual sections of your finger when we were doing the experiment. You were breaking up the whole of the cup into individual moments of contact. So very often, we're these two to come together. Let's call this scaling up of attention and scaling down of attention. So, first of all, let's map these onto mindfulness practices to make clear why we're doing this. So, I teach my students Vipassana, very traditional form of meditation. Notice what the word meditation means. It actually means moving towards the center. So we know it's going to have this aspect to it. So what do? Well, typically you train people by telling them to pay attention to their breath. Right? So first of all, what they're doing is paying attention not to the world, they're stepping back, but they're not really paying attention to their breath. What you tell them is the following. Again, language of explaining, not the language of training. Look at it in much more fine grain. You tell them to pay attention to the feelings and sensations that are being generated in their abdomen as they breathe. So as they inhale, they're feeling sensations in their abdomen, and as they exhale. And what they're doing is trying to, do that like I did with my finger. They're trying to maintain and renew their interest, constantly make it salient to themselves. Now notice what's happening. Normally, right, our embodied sensations, I'm not happy with that word for sort of philosophically important reasons, but I don't have time to go into it right now, right? Normally, we don't pay attention so much to our sensations, we pay attention through our sensations to the world, right? So normally I'm not paying attention to my feelings, I'm paying attention through my feelings to the cup. In meditation, I'm stepping back and not looking through my sensations, I'm stepping back and looking at them. Right? That's like, I don't look through the way my mind is framing things, I'm looking at the framing. I also do something else. I don't just look at it as one blob, I do something like observational analysis. I break the gestalt up into separate experiences. I'm doing this. I'm stepping back and looking at, and I'm breaking the gestalt of my experience up into its features, its atomic features, if you'll allow me a metaphor that you shouldn't push too far. That's what you do in meditation. And we'll talk about why would you do this? Why would that matter? And importantly, our question is, why would that help cause insight? So that's meditation, that's Vipassana, for example. I also teach my students a contemplative practice. So the word meditation means to move towards the center, and that fits perfectly with Vipassana and this kind of thing. Contemplation. Now it bespeaks how overly simplified the West is in trying to understand this, in that these terms are now treated as synonyms. Contemplative practices, meditative practices, it's all the same thing. Aren't these just synonyms? They're not synonyms. And paying attention to their etymology will quickly reveal this. First of all, the Latin etymology. Look, what's in the center of this is temple. It comes from a temple, which actually comes from the Latin word for a part of the sky that you look up to see the signs from the gods. To contemplate is to look up towards the divine. This also goes well and is convergent with the contemplatio, the Latin term, was a translation of this Greek word, theoria. And theoria also originally doesn't mean generating a theory. A theory is a species of theoria, because what I do with theoria is I try to see more deeply into reality. Do you see? Meditation is moving this way, and contemplation is moving that way. Meditation emphasizes scaling down, contemplation emphasizes scaling up. And I was taught both. In fact, I was taught three things in an integrated fashion. I was taught Vipassana, a scaling down strategy. I was taught Metta, a scaling up strategy, and you're scaling up with your sense of identity, by the way. We'll come back to that later. And then I was taught Tai Chi Chuan, because Tai Chi Chuan is about moving, right? In and out, in and out, flowing between these inner and outer movements in a dynamic and optimizing fashion. Why teach me all these things together? Because it's actually a system of these psychotechnologies that will optimize your cognition for insight. Okay, so do you remember we did the 9-dot problem, right? We talked about that.
All right, good place to stop here. This is so cool. I love the way he's describing attention now. And this is at the very cutting edge of understanding of attention that we have at this point. Yeah, okay. Let me see where we left off here.
The cat, which
yes. I love that example.
Letters are the features, the words are the
Gestalt.
the gestalt or the idas or the structural functional organization.
Yeah. Or the structural functional whole. Yeah, so how the whole thing functions and is structured to work together.
Mm-hmm.
That larger idea.
Well, and this brings us back to the arena and agent thing as well, because it's a cyclical relationship where they define the relationship.
Knowing.
Yeah, the participatory knowing, but it defines the arena is defined by the agents, but the agents are also defined by the arena.
To the arena. Yeah.
Well, the letters are in this case defined by the overall
Gestalt.
arena of
Yeah.
the understanding of these words. And that's the up and down axis here is, the Gestalt and the features.
Mm-hmm.
And so he introduces one axis within a, a schema.
Right.
Not Cartesian, not like plotted points, but movements and directions, in and out ofs.
Yes.
It allows for in and out instead of just up, down, left, right, forward, backwards, but in and out, movement through.
Yeah, I was thinking when I listened to this previously how cool it would be to find an animation. And I was thinking how good you would be for helping formulate something like that, or even just like a 3D model to help understand this. But it's pretty good with the 2D way that he expresses it here. And I love the idea of how we can utilize the letters to determine what the word is, but we can also use the shape of the word to determine what the individual letters are and automatically guess. So we're doing that, both those things all the time. And then we have, so we're utilizing this ability to gain deeper and deeper patterns, integrate those patterns, and then to look more deeply into the world. So we got this opacity, transparency shift that we can do, but then we have the up and the down, where the letters are features and the word is the Gestalt. The letters are features, word is the Gestalt. And that dynamical self-organizing process can be optimized by mindfulness practices, and why. And so we're understanding now meditation allows us to scale down, gain the fine detail of things, and then we can also scale up. So yeah, we can meditate to move towards the center, to
And that's not the center of this
break
chart.
our framing, and to break that framing up into tiny little features to understand the process better of our thinking, for instance. And then with the contemplation, where we get the word coming from the word temple, this outward looking up to the divine, and bringing those two together is these systems together into a larger process, like is what mindfulness is. That's what the Buddha discovered, the non-dual path. It's learning how to optimize both of these processes at once and bring them into unison.
Yeah. So contemplation is the scaling up and out at 45 degrees between the eidos, Gestalt axis, and the opacity to transparency axis, not the transparency to opacity. Boy, those words are hard to say together. So one is TO, and which is going
that's
toward
an important aspect of it. Yeah, that brings in more definition to it.
Yeah. So in this schema that he has,
the scaling down is going from trans to opaque, and then the scaling up is going opaque to trans.
And down into meditation goes.
Yes.
So the realm of meditation is down into features and going from transparency into opacity. So as far back into yourself until everything else is opaque.
Into opacity.
And that center is in center of this chart. The center is the center of self.
Yes, mindfulness.
The thing that
meditation
is in the center of everything else.
Moving toward the center.
And then going up into the right, so into the positive end of things. If, that's opacity into transparency.
Right.
So moving forward to get more understanding of this through the probe. Your eyes are probes too, in a sense, because you use them to look. And that is the scaling up into the meta. So you're trying to understand, well, the structural functional organization, what things actually are through their action, if you will. So there's, I guess from your perspective in the camera, there's this way and this way.
Yeah.
And you exist in this realm and this realm, and you're going back and forth. And meditation is breaking it down and looking at the going down to the
deep
feature, like say the finger, you down all the way down, all the way down, all the way down, and then you back in, almost like you could think of it as like retreating inward as well.
Yes. The inner versus the outer approaches.
Or even like if you're trying to like say I don't know, you study animals, but then you go even further, and well, then you study invertebrates, but then you go even further, and then you study that. So like, not just meditation and contemplation can be used in this schema as well, which is
now
interesting.
you can look at this
because
atomic structure
like
of our bodies, and then
focusing.
you got the astronomical structure of the universe.
So this, well, I guess yourself can be a center, but also the thing you're looking at can
Mhm.
also
Could
be
also
that
be a
as
center.
well.
Yeah.
And then the scaling up and out is call that the jack of all trades realm, where you're trying to get as much understanding of as much as you possibly can.
Yes.
And later on, he'll talk about like the
it's how our awareness works, how attention works.
yeah, and he'll talk about like where the pitfalls and also the blessings of each sides of this schema are, you know, and when to use them. And that's the third thing. It teaches you how to move through them and when to use them.
Right.
And that's like the Tai Chi and the, you know, movement practices.
So practicing the inner, the outer, and then the actual rhetoric of the doing the both of them in a graceful
kind of like the shaman is acting like the deer. You're acting like the
reciprocal dance.
You're acting like concepts.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like this schema. I'm gonna have to keep it. I'm a fan of, you know, charts and schemas and all that stuff, and
It's a good one.
Yeah, and all the information. So contemplation, though, the word is
from
a temple,
Yeah.
and one that you look up
Up
in
to.
and out through.
Yes.
And
then he talked about theoria,
which was one
which
of the
is
words.
where the word contemplation comes from. A
to see
theory-
more deeply
a
into.
theory is just a species of so theories are species of theoria.
Theory, yeah.
Theoria is what we use to see more deeply in general. So all these different theories, these species of theories that we utilize, are helping us see more deeply into the world. That's the practice of theoria, of contemplation, to see more deeply into. So they're both allowing us great. That's why this helps us generate insight. Both of these together, you understand the features, the fine detail, and then their structural, functional organization, and you can continually get a transcendent and deeply finely tuned, telescoped, microscoped into level of detail playing together at once. This is how you play music when you're in the flow state, or do anything like with that. It requires fine movements of graceful execution, such as an Olympian doing the pole vault, or gymnastics, or the ballerina and the ice skater.
Well, even like just like standard studying of anything, you know, you'll have the like you're studying the thing, but which you could call it your like it would be in the meditation realm. It's not meditation, but for these purposes. So you're studying the thing, but then you need time to step away and contemplate the thing.
What it all means together, so you can get all the little terms.
Because you're not just studying
together,
one
and then
thing,
you can
you're
understand
studying
the subject as a whole.
Yeah.
Through all these minor things, and then the actual teaching of it, or the writing of a really good paper or new theory, is the explication of both of those understandings at once. That's kind of like what John Vervaeke recognizes. Tai Chi can be very useful for, because this is a moving meditation practice. You're going out and in and out, and you're learning to optimize this process, and then this capacity to be able to go inner, to be able to go outer, and to be able to play with the fine-tune involvement of both of those processes at once. A lot translates to everything else that we do in the world. Yeah. So very helpful in helping us individually and as a species attenuate to our environments. So yeah, I think that's a good point.
Yeah, let's bring him back a few seconds, just to.
Or do you think it's a good time for a 5-minute break here?
Yeah, we can
Let's
take.
go ahead and
We're
do a
about
break
at the
time.
50-minute mark.
Halfway through.
Can we just, while we're on break, leave it on there so people can look at the chart that he has? If
sure, yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, just let
me bring it back. So we're at 26:30 right now.
26:30.
You got that?
Yeah, I think that would be good, because
up on the screen
the way he drew this out is really good, and you should draw it yourself too, so that you can start putting ideas and things within this little chart that he has.
Yeah,
that's
I like that.
what I'm doing. It helps, like, you know, this is a good chart to think about the things as we move on from here.
Yeah.
Well, are we scaling out with our thoughts, or are we scaling down, or scaling up or scaling down?
Right.
So this will become a very valuable chart. I might make a large one that, you know, you guys might not be able to see it, but we can play with just for our understanding.
We'll get a whiteboard or something,
and then we can put, or a cork board so we can put tacks, like
Right.
read a little thing, rip it off, stick it, like where you think it would go, kind of like a political charter or whatever, but it's like, okay, there's this practice. Is it a going down?
Oh yeah, we could just take pictures of the different scenes of his own examples as well.
Sure.
Put them up.
Yeah, and like for my own practice, like this helps me to be able to put stuff in 3D space because that's how my brain works. If I can put it in 3D space, it's fine.
All right, so let me find that part here. Let's see.
Yeah.
I love his Tai Chi movements that he shows
Don't
off.
go too far back though.
There's a part where it's zoomed in, and it's a little easier to see. I think it's probably around there somewhere.
Let's keep it kind of current though, because he writes more stuff on there, and the stuff is pretty good.
Yeah, let me see if we can get one more.
Trying to
last
get you the
close
best,
view.
the best stuff.
Let's see where this puts us.
Yeah, off his shoulder where. Yeah, there we go. That's.
Well, we don't have the other that diagonals in there. Here's the diagonals. Okay, that should be good enough.
And just remember while you're looking at this, up and right is contemplation, down and left is meditation.
Mm-hmm.
The O and T mean either opacity or transparency.
Transparency,
and,
opacity,
and then
opacity,
features and
transparency.
Gestalt.
Yes.
So features are at the bottom and Gestalt is at the top.
Gestalt, the big picture. The features, the individual items that make up the big picture. And our attention can actually go any direction here, and we can actually focalize it. So we can go just from transparency, as we were saying, to opacity and vice versa. We can go from Gestalt to feature and feature to Gestalt. We're doing them both at once, or we can even focus on one at a time. And then we have the scaling up and the scaling down of this recognition and this interrelating of these patterns that gives us the insights, that helps us generate the insightful understanding of whatever it is that we're situations, whatever we're trying to understand.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to take
guys.
a quick break. I'm going to go to the party.
We'll be right back. Go ahead and grab yourself a drink and let your friends and family know about Actuali Podcast and John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. If you're enjoying this series, we highly encourage you to definitely like and subscribe, and go on and like and subscribe John Vervaeke as well, and you can watch the series over there too. All right, guys, we'll be right back. Okay, what's up, everybody? We're back.
All right.
Hope you all had a good break.
Yeah.
I think we're ready to jump back in here.
Yep. Did we? Oh, sorry, my phone's going off.
Hey. Oh, we're working.
Did we want to bring the volume up just a little bit?
Let's do that.
Yeah, let's bring it up.
Bring it up.
We're still getting better every
There we are.
day. Getting
That should
everything.
help a little bit.
Yeah, we don't have to be as
Make
close
sure.
now. Get a little breathing room.
Get us on par with Vervaeke here. All right, so let's jump back into it. Where were we at again now? 2630?
2630. And going over scaling up and scaling down. Scaling up is a contemplative movement into the meta, and then scaling down is the meditative aspect towards, so withdrawing into, and then your attention drawing into, say, the object or yourself or inward, and then the scaling up is the contemplation of how all these features fit together.
Mm-hmm.
So one is breaking it down into features, and one is the overarching view.
Yes. Yes.
I'm going to have to end up
And that's the
drawing this chart.
Opaque to transparency, and then the up and down, the Gestalt to the individual items like letters, words versus letters, and then the scaling up and the scaling down of the association that those patterns represent, that helps us experience and cultivate insight.
Yes.
Yes. All right. So we're dropping back in here.
Yes.
Here we go.
Okay, so do you remember we did the 9-dot problem, right? We talked about that. Remember the fact that you can misframe things. So let's do the 9-dot problem again. Join all 9 dots with 4 straight lines, and people find it difficult. Why? Remember, we talked about this. They automatically, listen to the words. Remember, they automatically and unconsciously project a square there, and then they automatically take this to be a connect the dot problems, and so no non-dot turns are possible, and therefore they can't get the solution. The solution is, here's 4 straight lines. 1, 2, 3, 4. The reason why people find that so difficult is I have to break the square, and I have to not treat it as a typical connect the dot problem. I have to not treat it categorically, to use language you've heard already, because you don't do non-dot turns. Remember this. Now notice there's 2 moments to having an insight. I have to break up an inappropriate frame. What do I have to do? I have to break up the gestalt, right? And I also have to de-automatize my cognition. I have to make it not operate unconsciously and automatically. Well, how do I do that? I take stuff that's normally happening unconsciously and I have to bring it back into consciousness. Yes? That makes sense? How do I do that? I do that by doing a transparency opacity shift. Normally, I'm automatically sensing through my probe, but I can shift my awareness and become aware of my probe. I can bring things back into awareness. So you de-automatize cognition by doing a transparency to opacity shift. So I break up the inappropriate frame, and I de-automatize my cognition by scaling down. Now, interestingly enough, there is lots of work by Knoblich and other people showing that you can improve people's ability to solve insight problems if you get them to do what's called chunk decomposition and constraint relaxation. Chunk decomposition is just breaking up a gestalt. That's what chunk decomposition means. Constraint relaxation is basically de-automatizing your cognition. De-automatizing your cognition. Scaling down helps you to break up the chunks, break up the gestalts, and it helps you to de-automatize your cognition. But is that enough for insight? It's not enough. Yes, I have to break up the inappropriate frame, but I have to make an alternative and better frame. I have to, watch, I have to widen my field of awareness. I have to take stuff that was in the background and change its relevance. I have to look more deeply for deeper, broader patterns that I have not considered before. What do I have to do? In order to make a new frame, I have to scale up. And we also have lots of independent evidence, having nothing to do with mindfulness or meditation, that one of the ways you can improve people's ability to be insightful is if they get if they have training or practice or are naturally disposed to being able to scale up. If people can complete patterns in a kind of leaping that C.C. Benner and Baker talk about, right, and other people, if we can scale up in that way, if we can take pictures that are out of focus and refocus them mentally so we can suddenly see what the picture is. Again and again and again, when people can scale up better, they're better at solving insight problems. So both make you better. But there's a problem, because both also make you worse. Because if I just scale up, if I just maximize, like tightening the string, then of course I will immediately project the square and then I'm locked. Well, shouldn't I just scale down? Just meditate. Always. If I just keep breaking up gestalts, I'll never make the solution. I'll choke myself. That's what happens when people are choking. You get a way, like if you're sparring with somebody, a way to get them off is to compliment them. That was a really good, right hook you just threw. Because then the person will start stepping back and looking at it, and they'll get all screwed up because they'll break up the ability to generate the gestalt. So notice what I'm saying, because stick with me, because this is really sort of tricky. This can improve your chances for insight by breaking up a bad frame. But it can also mess up your problem solving by causing you to choke. This can improve your ability for insight by causing you to make a better frame. But this can also cause you to leap into an inappropriate frame and be locked in fixation. So what should you do? You don't want the strings too tight. You don't want the strings too loose. And you don't want it just halfway. Well, what you want to do is you want to train people in both of these skills and then train them to flow between them. It's called opponent processing. So they're pulling and pushing on each other, and so they're forced to coordinate and constantly get the right degree of attentional engagement that is most dynamically fitted to the world. That's why the people who trained me in all these things. That's why you shouldn't equate mindfulness just with meditation. It's not. So if you pay attention, for example, to the Eightfold Path, you'll have people be trained in meditative practices, contemplative practices, practices in which you flow between the opposites until you learn, like in a martial art, to get an apt and constantly adjusted fittedness, attentional fittedness to the world. Now, this leads very naturally into talking about mystical experiences and the kinds of mystical experiences that people can have within their mindfulness practices. But before I do that, let's gather. Notice what we've said here. We have an understanding of mindfulness. What's mindfulness doing? Mindfulness is basically teaching us how to appropriate and train a flexibility of attentional scaling so that we can intervene effectively in how we are framing our problems and increase the chances of insight when insight is needed. Notice that this didn't really, how is being present making you more insightful? But I've given you a way of understanding being present that works. When I'm scaling down, I'm actually like making my mind less representational, less inferential. I'm doing all of this work to become aware of and gain some mastery over my processes of problem framing, and thereby training skills that will make me more insightful. What happens if you were just to scale down and practice scaling down and scaling down and scaling down and scaling down? Well, you can actually get to one kind of important mystical experience. So Foreman calls this, and it's well attested, calls this the pure consciousness event, the PCE. The pure consciousness event. It's a kind of mystical experience you can have after extensive mindfulness practice. I've experienced this. Let's do it. So right now I'm looking at the world. And the thing you're doing when you're practicing meditation is you try and step back and look at the lens of your mind, if you'll allow me. And what happens is it's hard to maintain because you have such deep developed habits of directing your attention back out towards the world. And you start thinking about, got to do my laundry, got to do this. And then what you have to do is you have to bring your attention back again. You have to do that. You have to recenter and step back and look at your mind rather than automatically looking through it. And you keep practicing. And that's like that. And it's arduous. But these are like doing reps. That's meditation. Meditation is like you're building this ability to step back and look at your mind. And then what happens is, right, remember how we went back in layers? We went into the probe, and then into our fingers, and into the sensations. When I do this with people, it's often the people who've had some mindfulness training that can step back all the way into their sensations. That's not a coincidence. So now I'm looking at my mind. Right? And then I start looking at the more subsidiary layers of my mind, the deeper layers by which I was looking at the upper layers. And then I step back again. So now I'm just looking at my consciousness. And eventually I step back and I'm not even conscious of anything. I'm not conscious of this sensation. I'm just conscious. That's why it's called the pure consciousness event. You're not conscious of anything. You're just fully present as consciousness. You're not aware of yourself. You're not looking through your self-machinery. You're not looking through your consciousness. You're not even looking through your mind. You're just fully conscious, the pure consciousness event. This is the event that results from this? What about if you were to really scale up? Well, think about things that you might have heard associated with the Buddhist view. I'm going to see everything as interconnected and everything is flowing, impermanent. I'm going to create this overarching gestalt, and the gestalt is going to be so overarching, it's going to include and encompass me. I'm going to experience this resonant at-one-ment. And you already know what that's like because we've already talked about it. Think about that as just a super flow state in which I'm deeply at one with everything. Super flow state, resonant at-one-ment. I don't use atonement because that has a particular Christian meaning that I'm not trying to invoke here, at-one-ment. See, this model of mindfulness explains why people get into these kinds of mystical experiences. If they do a lot of meditative practices, they will get a pure consciousness event. If they do a lot of contemplative practices, they will develop this empathetic, participatory, flowing, super-flowing, resonant at-one-ment. But remember, what we want ultimately is we want these two together. There's a third state, and this is actually the state that matters. This is called the state of non-duality. So let me try and explain to you a way in which you can at least imagine you could get into it. It's a way I train people. Imagine that you're going to be cycling, scaling up and scaling down with your breath. So as you inhale, you scale up, and you do that sort of resonant at-one-ment. You're trying to be at, like flowing at-one-ment with everything, and then as you exhale, you're doing the Vipassana. You're trying to step back as close as you can to the pure consciousness event, and you oscillate back and forth with the breath. And you often have to do that for years. But what can happen, and there's other ways of getting into this state. This isn't exclusive. This is one way I was taught. What can happen is you can have the third kind of mystical experience. It's not the pure consciousness event. It's not resonant at-one-ment. It includes both and transcends both. It's both at the same time. Your awareness is deeply to the depths of your consciousness and deeply to the depths of reality, and it's completely at one. It's all at once. This is a prajna state, a state of non-duality. This is one term for wisdom. And it's this kind of mystical experience. Now this is the state that's actually sought for, that non-duality, because this is the state that should lead to a comprehensive capacity for insight. Because you're not going to have an insight about 9 dots and 4 straight lines. You're going to have an insight into the fundamental, the guts, the grammar of the agent-arena relationship. You're pushing to the ground of the agent, and you're pushing out to the circumference of the arena, and you're pushing that machinery to optimize so that you can see in as deeply integrated a fashion as possible that connectedness between the two. So you have the capacity for an insight, not into this problem or that problem, but in an insight into your existential modes of being. This is how you can remember the being mode. You can have a fundamental insight into it. Now this is in fact, of course, what Siddhartha experienced. He'd been practicing Vipassana and a contemplative practice called metta very deeply, very powerfully, and it looks like one of his great innovations was to conjoin the two together. He often talks about them. And what happened was a radical transformation. He experienced enlightenment. We're going to talk about what that might mean. So after his enlightenment, after his awakening, he's walking down the road.
All right, so before we get to this story here, he brings us back to that 9-dot problem, where you have 9 dots in a square, and you're supposed to connect all the dots with 4 straight lines. And everyone gets stuck on this, even if you tell them, think outside the box. So this capacity to break up inappropriate frames that we can use with inward meditation, and this capacity to transcend and create new frames, is what allows us to widen our perspective, widen our attention, and our problem-solving capacity for the 9-dot problems that we know we can actually draw through those first 3 lines and go past that square that the dots are making up in our mind. We can go outside of the square, then we make a turn that gets the other 3. We come back to the top, and then we go and we get the last in that 4th line, and it works. And you're allowed to do that. You're not told you're not allowed to do that, but the brain really needs to be able to play at the edge there to be able to figure those things out. And so the optimization of these capacities that allow for insight and breaking the framing and making new frames, scaling up and scaling down, is what mindfulness practices truly are. That's what the Eightfold Path is teaching. That is what allows for these high-level mystical experiences. You were going to say something. Go ahead.
Just as far as like while we're on the scaling down end, the meditation end, it's to, the purpose of it is to deautomatize, say the 9 dots, to break that framing of well, it's 9 dots, well, it's a box.
This idea that it's a box is like what we're breaking.
And then there's the breaking of the gestalt, which is then okay. So one is a I guess one is an automatic assumption. Well, they're both you're breaking automatic assumptions, and then you're breaking the overall structure of the box. So the breaking of the gestalt is the chunk decomposition. Decomposing the chunks. And the automatic assumption and is the constraint relaxation. So it doesn't have to just be in the box. You're relaxing the constraints. So you're breaking down the box and relaxing the constraints. And let's see.
So
Where do I
going
got
from
for the
unconsciousness into consciousness, and being aware of how our mind is moving and thinking, basically. Aware of the sensations, aware of the thoughts, rather than... going from mind down to submind, to down to submind, and down. And then this scaling up end is, we need the scaling up because we can't just, we need to widen our attention, widen the field of the attention, because potentials to create new potential patterns, to find any new patterns that we're missing. It's really cool how it describes. So people meditate for a long time and they experience these pure consciousness events where it's no longer just consciousness of anything, it's pure consciousness, and it feels like it's in everything. And that's where people get this sense that like everything feels like me. It feels like everything is the self. Everything feels like it's inside happening. And scaling up with deep reverence and awe, for instance, and worshipfulness, there can be, like you can become very virtuosic in a practice, whether it be sports or anything else, by practicing these capacities that allow us to be in the flow state. And so there's a resonance with, and the sense of at-one-ment with everything. And both of these together... So becoming aware of both of these existential modes, the agent scaling all the way down deep into the agent, and then scaling all the way up to and pushing at the very edges of the arena. Not too tight, not too loose, though. And as we scale up and scale down, so we figure out where a good center is.
And that state's the non-duality state, or the prajna state. And that's where we're able to
get into opponent processing, this attenuating and this reciprocal dance. So it's mindfulness, not just meditation. It's meditation and contemplation together to generate insight to be able to break old frames, create better new frames.
Mm-hmm.
And the Eightfold Path involves this. This development of being able to flow between the different states, the inner and the outer experiences, and to create increased fittedness to the world. So it is so much like a dance, and that's why martial arts must have gotten so deep and widely practiced, on top of the attentive and the attentive practices, the meditative and contemplative practices
And something
that were involved in ancient Hinduism and Buddhism and Vada Vedanta and other schools, yoga and so forth.
well, it's something that we can do physically. That also helps trigger these insights within us. So there's also a merging between, ultimately the object. I hate to say it like this, but the object world, and then through the probe into everything, and then all the way in, and then reflecting on your own practice, and then going back out. And it's a physical thing we can do to not just do it mentally, but also extend that into the rest of the world.
Yes.
And interact with it. It's no wonder.
Yeah, and every moment you can be doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, washing the dishes.
Mm-hmm.
You can go deep into the details of the experience, the feeling of the water, the way the soap is sudding up, and all of that. You can really become super attentive on all the little details, the fine details, and then you can get an awareness of your awareness of that, and then the awareness of the practice of the of doing of the awareness, and you can see how it just goes deeper, and then you can be in a sense of deep appreciation and deep of involvement, like honoring the moment fully, which is like an outward expression in relation with that allows that deep resonance and that deep sense of at one-ment, as he described. I like how the word atonement and at one-ment go together. It's like remembering, I got off course, let me reattenuate myself, recalibrate here, back into the fullness of love and light expression, and treating every moment as holy.
Well, and so the necessity for this third state is to, help with the cons, which the cons of scaling up too far is you'll leap into inappropriate framings and then become fixated. And well, if you've ever seen bad like kung fu schools and martial arts schools, then it's not
it's always a fun,
not exactly,
fun trope
but
in the movies, though.
And then the scaling down cons is you'll choke, you'll fail to act, so the balance between the two, I wish the Star Wars universe would have figured that out, and then they could have found the balance of the Force, because I don't know, like Anakin didn't bring balance to it, and then there was Luke, and then after Luke, and come on guys, the third way, not Jedi or Sith, but the third way,
yeah,
which is flowing through both of them, and
that's what the true
incorporating.
Jedi recognized. But yeah, what do you do?
Well, it's the universe is accurate. They're constantly warring, so
they're still calibrating.
Yeah. So let's see.
Yeah,
so,
training the flexibility of motivational scaling.
Yeah.
Being present, to be able to be insightful, less representational, less inferential, to gain mastery over our problem solution framing. Looking at the mind rather than through the mind as meditation. Stepping back to center. Looking through at consciousness until nothing but consciousness remains. And the scaling up, the resonant at one-ment. And you can do a practice where it involves breathing in and feeling that deep at one-ment and expanding your heart out for all beings and all moments and treating each moment as sacred. And then you can breathe in deeply and feel the sensation of the expansion of the abdomen, all of the processes of how the stomach opens, and then the chest, and the coolness of the air entering your nostrils, all of these different features that you can bring your attention to. You can go in and out. In mystical Christianity, monks, when they're reciting the Jesus prayer to the Lord Jesus, Son of God, and so that is happening on the inward breath. Have mercy on me is on the out of breath. Giving up, surrendering. When I first heard that prayer and described as tuning oneself into being fully present, fully honoring each moment as holy, it really helped help me gain a further understanding of the idea of the word sin being from the term for miss the mark, falling short when shooting, aiming at something. So if we're aiming to transcend our baser instincts and live in ever-increasing states of honor and harmony and love with one another, then we can utilize these mindfulness practices that allow us to hone that attentiveness that we can give to every moment.
And not just using
so we're doing
them,
it ever more consistently.
Balancing them.
Yeah.
You know, because like you can kind of see this in the outward world. You'll see like the Space Cadet Psychonaut guys that, you know, they're doing a lot of Deemsters and running around and doing the thing and like blasting off and, you know, having this whole thing. And that would be the, you know, top right end of the spectrum, the contemplative end of the spectrum, and always like, oh man, like time, dude, you know, like, but then on the other end you can have, you know, the quiet meditator that's too far down into it all the time.
Yeah,
and
movement and stillness. But you can bring them into a beautiful dance together where you can be still while you're moving inside, flowing effortlessly, responding with the perfect amount of pressure or relinquishment in every moment.
Well, and I don't think this third state is this kind of thing. It's going in both directions at the same time. So either scaling up and not now I'm scaling up, now I'm scaling down. Not it starts as that, you know, as you're practicing, but eventually it's scaling up and scaling down at the same time.
Yeah, because it's like when you're dancing, you're holding on to the other person, saying, how much pressure am I applying? How loose am I at the same time? It's got to be the perfect amount for every single pull and push movement in the dance. And both are attenuating to one another through the brain's recognition of immediate, you know, very deeply fine-tuned responses to the hundreds of muscles in our bodies as we're moving around and responding to one another as well. We're feeling the pressure and the relinquishment of pressure, and we're flowing with. So yes, we're doing very much a surrender and a control at once, and being above that and allowing it to happen naturally together is to be fully mindful and just fully into that pure flow state.
And we seem to
at once
kind of naturally exist like that without realizing it. Say like imagine like a dense like urban area where
all the time,
if you the scaling down end is realizing your like for the sake of this example, realizing your individual behaviors and your rituals and things that you do for yourself, but then there's the overarching, well, everybody else socially that you have to interact with as well. And you're doing that at the same time, and we do it really naturally. Like, yeah, we got stoplights and stuff that tell traffic to stop and all this other stuff, but we're all, you know, like say like driving down the road where, well, you're thinking about yourself.
Yeah, those lines aren't stopping.
You're thinking
cars.
about how everything
we're
else
stopping.
is moving around, and and we do it naturally anyway. And actually, you know, in extreme situations like where your brain has to go on overdrive for like survival and ends, that's scaling up and scaling down at the same time. You're going down to, okay, what are the features real quick, and then how do they all fit together, and then boom,
real quick,
instantly out of the way. Don't hit the deer.
Yes. Yeah, it's amazing.
So we naturally already do it,
and we can cultivate it.
And we've got the tools, you know, and we're making more tools to be able to do this. You know, meditation being, well, traditional, like sitting there meditation and moving meditation, but also the not so traditional, like, you know, jumping into a mosh pit or something, kind of thing.
There's so many levels to the outward expression of it and the inward expression of it, and how the two are playing together at all times.
Or even,
in everything you do.
The subtle meditation yet contemplation at the same time of doing a rock garden.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, how do you get around that thing without putting foot marks? And then using one of those rakes is a little bit harder than you think.
And
You
then the watching
really
of
got to,
yourself doing that.
yeah, and
Yeah.
and
The
moving in
feeling
and
of
out.
the heat of the sun and the softness of the soil, and then the greater picture that you're doing again, and back and forth and back and forth. Brings you deeper and deeper into the moment, and it's what grants us meaningfulness in life. That the more that we can make meaning of it, the more meaningful it becomes. And that sounds synonymous, but it actually is a
Well, it's the
reciprocal dance. Yeah, it's something that you get to like tune into and wind up. And
all the way back,
deepen.
all the way back to early episodes of, life doesn't follow the A goes to B, B goes to C thing. It does that reciprocal thing, and that was a conundrum.
It's
like,
a dynamical system.
you know,
biology is all dynamical systems.
So the tree leaves and the leaf trees.
Yeah.
At the same time.
At the same time.
And
Just like we do.
And ideally, we should be able to scale up
at once
and scale down at the same time in the right amount that we, the optimal amount. The golden mean is that, what was the word for that?
The middle path.
Yeah, it was the non-duality.
The non-duality is what that's what the yin yang is describing when you look at that ancient Taoist symbol. That's what that's describing. It's the highest way for us to operate. Is also the fundamental nature of reality. This interrelating opposites, opposing forces at all times. So what did he term that again? The oppositional or the opponent processing. That's right. Opponent processing, that attenuation process that's constantly going on with that in and out of and up and down and scaling in and out of attention. Yeah, it's a lot, and I've watched this episode like multiple times, parts of this week now, and I've seen it before, and it's just there's more and more and more here as we start delving into the series. You keep on picking up more and more, and then the idea just keeps stretching itself wider. It's really cool. I mean, like your mind's encapsulation of it, I guess. There's more and more detail and texture and insight.
Well, it seems like we're moving, if we were to chart our path through these episodes up until now, we've been moving from the feature transparency into opacity end of things. Now we first started talking about flow state and stuff like that to introduce the other end of that, but the way we're learning is it's going from the features. Here are the features, here are the things, here are the building blocks you need to be able to
understand,
erect the castle, if you will. And now we're starting to get to the point where it's like, okay, we're moving beyond features now into the overarching understanding of where we're going on this train.
Yeah, and he wanted us to understand that Aristotle really got that there's something that needs to be balanced here to optimize our meaning making in the world, to optimize our agent arena relationships. We got to understand this growth process, the transformational process itself. How can we best attune ourselves? How are we best developed? And what are these different modes of being and different potentials, and how are they interrelating? And the East really, like you said, like there's this framing of detail up into organization, and now we're going to be going into this other end where the East really specialized very well and then incorporated the two as well. And as we see in the East practice of the internal and the outward practices, and then the dancing and the movement and martial arts practices. And so
and we've all throughout human history, we've been kind of doing it anyway, just naturally, like say dancing around the campfire, enacting what, I don't know, a story of a good hunt or something else like that. We're doing this, creating the features, breaking the framing, and then giving you the overall idea, but then you're having
the
watching
embodied
this, you're
experience it too. Yeah.
And it's like, are we
and it's a story.
Are we creating,
and it's how to hunt.
Are we creating these what's the word, psychotechnologies, or are we discovering them?
right?
Because our brains aren't really much different than they were
It's kind of a both
a
and.
few
Now
100,000
that we
years
have
ago.
these brains with the forebrain and the capacity for,
Or were there like
self-
seeds for like like it's like, okay, we started out as a species with a set of toolbox of how our brain works, and then we started taking things out and building other freaking
we
tools.
started exacting
But everything that
parts of the brain to do other things.
I guess you
Yeah.
could think about it like this: everything that a screwdriver can build, or that you can build with a screwdriver, is in and of itself in that screwdriver. But you need more things than just the screwdriver.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
they
like-
both fit onto each other.
And we haven't even
The
fulfilled.
space
Oh, well,
informs the
that's the
form, the
potential.
form informs the space.
The potential of the. Yeah, okay, yeah. So we've already talked. Like, it's just yet again the cycle, even like through time. You know, like it's almost like the future informing the past. And, well, he went over that in an earlier episode too. So yeah, hey, it's all making sense now.
It's really it clicks deeper and deeper and deeper, and just like it starts to chime beautifully, and then you start seeing this musical nature of the interrelation of aspects of reality and our sense of conscious awareness, and this deeper sense of capacity for harmony with that, and resonance, and a sense of wonder for it all as well. So
Is wonder and wander spelt the same?
no, yeah, wander is W-A-N-D-E-R, and wonder is W-O.
I think they're related words. There's something about it because when you wander,
Yeah, I think Whitman.
When you
was it
wonder,
Whitman or
you're-
Emerson that talked about loafing. He
loafing,
felt like loafing was important too, and that wasn't just sitting; it was like just kind of walking around. and
walking around and
experiencing
hanging out
it,
in a
just being-
spot,
just
and
being.
moving around,
Yeah, just being, man.
just being, man. Yeah, wonder and wander. Because when you wonder, you're kind of wandering through. Like if you're wondering about something, you have a certain set, say, table of things that you're wondering about.
Curiosity.
And then
it's
you're
also
wandering
the state of
through.
awe. Like wonders and like, oh,
well, yeah.
wow, that kind of
Yeah.
wonder. Yeah,
Well, yeah, well, you wander through that too. You know, you come across, huge, like big sky.
the wonder definitely generates the curiosity.
Mm-hmm. There's got to be a
and
connection.
it's so big that the brain starts, growing new pathways to try and incorporate it all at once. That all of it, that is so much to take in at once. So we have to develop an insight into our existential modes through awakening mindfulness practices.
Yeah.
Allow us to be more and more in the being state.
Yeah. Instead of them having and being miserable state,
Yeah.
having
And what's
this.
beautiful is you can be in both at once.
Yeah.
That's the real game. That's the non-dualistic game. It's being that squiggly line between the yin and the yang. The feet is the feet are on the land and the sea at once, and the body stretches out into the heavens like those old alchemical paintings.
Yeah. So is the frog. Frog's got 1 foot in water, 1 foot on the land.
Nice,
Yeah,
nice.
that's the
Amphibian.
totem power of the frog.
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, let's jump back into it here.
He experienced enlightenment. We're going to talk about what that might mean. So after his enlightenment, after his awakening, he's walking down the road, and people come up to him, and his visage is changed. Think about when you are watching, when you see somebody and you know they're in the flow state, and they're flowing, and that grace, and that energy, and the musicality of intelligibility that's playing across their face and their gestures and their motions. And most of it you're only picking up implicitly, but you've got a sense, what's going, oh, that's so beautiful, that's so graceful, that's so much power, and there's a charismatic, and you're just caught up in it. So these men are approaching Siddhartha, and he's filled with that. And so they say to him, "Are you a god?" Think about what conditions have to be like where that's a reasonable thing to ask of someone. And he answers very clearly, "No, I'm not." "Are you some kind of angelic messenger or being?" "No, I'm not." "Are you some kind of prophet?" "No, I'm not." "Are you just a man?" "No, I'm not." They're frustrated. "What are you then?" I am awake. That's how he gets his title. He moves from talking about an identity he could have to a fundamental way of being. I am awake. He has fully, deeply, the depths I've tried to indicate here, sati, remembered the being mode in a way that isn't an insight about this or that problem, but is a fundamental insight into what it is to be a human being. A systematic set of insights that optimizes your entire being, that triggers and empowers a fundamental transformative experience. So, as a cognitive scientist, especially one who studies the connections between Buddhism and cognitive science, I've become very interested in these kinds of experiences that people have. And I have colleagues and collaborators that are also interested in this. Why do people pursue altered states of consciousness? Why is the mindfulness revolution, which is the pursuit of altered states of consciousness, so powerful? Why are we going through the psychedelic revolution right now? Because unlike other therapeutic pharmaceuticals, psychedelics work exactly by bringing about an altered state of consciousness. Why is this so powerfully important? Why is it that we're not the only creatures, in fact, that pursue altered states of consciousness? It looks like the more intelligent a creature is, the more it will pursue altered states of consciousness. Caledonian crows will tumble down rooftops in order to make themselves dizzy, which is a risky thing to do, but they do it because they're enjoying the altered state of consciousness. Why is it that some of these altered states, mystical experiences, certain types of psychedelic experiences within a therapeutic context, we're going to talk about all of this, can bring about and afford such powerful transformations? What is it that's going on there? And here's what's interesting. Sometimes people will have a kind of altered state of consciousness that, in my mind, it recapitulates the axial revolution. Look, normally when you have an altered state of consciousness, let's pick up on Siddhartha's metaphor, awakening, wakening up. That's in contrast to being asleep, to dreaming. So what happens in your typical state of altered state of consciousness, one that you experience every night? You're dreaming. Now when you're in the dream state, you think that that world is real. You interact with it as if real, but when you wake up, you go, oh, that was just a dream. That wasn't real. This is real. This. Normally, when we come out of an altered state of consciousness, we point at it the finger of rejection and say, that isn't real. Oh, I was drunk. That's not real. Oh, I was high. That's not real. But sometimes people have certain kinds of experiences, altered states of consciousness, in which exactly the opposite occurs. They go into that state and they come back and they say, that was more real. That was really real. And this is less real. Do you see how that's axial? That's like, wait, that higher, why do we call it a higher state of consciousness? That higher state of consciousness, that I had access to the real world. And when I come back, like somebody in Plato's cave, I've come back out of the sunlight. This, I now realize, is only echoes and shadows. It's less real. In fact, and because of my desire to be in contact with what's real, I'm going to change myself and I'm going to change my world to try and recapture, sati, to remember what that's like. I want to live in greater contact with that really real. And so they start to transform their whole lives and their whole self. The whole agent-arena relationship is completely and radically, revolutionarily restructured. This is known as quantum change theory. Bad name. Good theory. People do this. This is, of course, very important for understanding what happened to people like Siddhartha. In fact, most of the world religions that emerge at the axial revolution are predicated on the idea that there are higher states of consciousness that should empower, challenge, and encourage us to engage in such quantum transformation, to go through these radical transformative experiences. It's obviously at the core of Buddhism. You experience Satori, right? You realize shunyata. It's at the core, right, of Vedanta, when I experience moksha and release. It's at the core of Taoism. I realize the Tao. So, how is it, right, that these experiences have such authority? But it's not just that they're important historically, right? They're at the core of the world religions, right? And you say, well, what about the Western? Like Sufism within Islam and the Christian mystic tradition and Kabbalah, like all of the world traditions point to these higher states of consciousness that can bring about these radical modal transformations in our cognition and our very being. But that's important enough. But like when you do surveys, if you look at some of the work that's been done, 30 to 40% of the population has experienced these events. And it's like flow across cultures, language groups, socioeconomic status, gender, pervasive and universal. Not universal in the sense that everybody has it, but universal in the sense that there doesn't seem to be any type, class, or order of human beings that is not capable of experiencing it. So both qualitatively, historically, and quantitatively, scientifically, it's like this is an important phenomenon. And here's what's really important for our purposes. There's a deep remember I said before, there's a deep connection between how often you flow and how meaningful you find your life. That is also more radically the case for these states. People who have experienced these higher states of consciousness and undergone these quantum changes, these deep transformational experiences, reliably report, and there's good experimental evidence to support it, that they have had a significant increase in meaning in life. In fact, many people report these experiences as the most significant in their life, and that a lot of the meaning of their life is hinged upon these transformations. There are deep connections between awakening and recovering meaning. There are deep connections between awakening and insight. As I've already indicated, we'll come back to see, there's a deep continuity between this kind of insight, mystical experience, and full-blown awakening experience. My lab, we've just finished running with my associate Anderson Taub, my lab director, lab manager, Jinsun Kim, all of my wonderful RAs. And they'll show up in the acknowledgement. We just have submitted a paper because we ran an experiment. We did a massive M-Turk survey trying to see if there was a relationship between if people have a mystical experience and how meaningful they find their lives. And there is in fact a significant relationship between mystical experience and if you have meaning in life. We did a more fine-grained analysis, and this is consonant with the work of Samantha Heinzelman and others, experimental work showing that it's something like a capacity for insight, making sense, which is often called coherence in the literature, that seems to be what's doing all the heavy lifting. So it doesn't really matter, if you'll allow me, so much what the content of your mystical experience is. In fact, very often there's no content. They're ineffable. But what seems to be happening is you're somehow optimizing your capacity for making sense, both inwardly and outwardly. It's like what's happening is some improved optimization of anagoge. And people find that deeply meaningful. So there is good reason to believe, I'm not advocating Buddhism here. Because I've already pointed out there are similar claims in all of the mystical traditions. And I'm not claiming that those traditions are all identical. I'm not Aldous Huxley. But there seems to be some deep truths here about the nature of attention, the nature of mindfulness, and the enhancement of the ability to enter into these higher states of consciousness that can significantly alleviate existential distress and bring about a pervasive and profound kind of optimization of our insight and our capacity for finding our lives meaningful. And that would be being able to do all of those things, right? Alleviate the existential anxiety, create a systematic kind of insight, a transformation of agents in an arena that recovers the being mode, forge transformation. I mean, isn't that the core of meaning? And the ability to do it, wouldn't that be the core of wisdom? So what I want to do is I want to continue on, and I want to explore this. What's going on with mystical experiences? What's going on with these higher states of consciousness? Why are psychedelics coming back into the center of the cognitive science investigation? We've got to talk about consciousness. We've got to talk about altered states of consciousness. We've got to talk about higher states of consciousness and transformative experience. And what is the knowing that's going on here? Because it's no knowing of words. There's no words. There's no content. Pure consciousness event. You're not conscious of anything. Everything's the same. It's just, there's the resonant at one minute, the flowing. What kind of knowing is it? That's what we're going to take a look at next time. Thank you very much.
That was awesome. What's up, guys? I'd love to hear what people are thinking of this so far. That last, 15, 20 minutes is amazing.
I've got a little stick figure storyline here that I'm quite amused. So after enlightenment, Sid's walking down the street and he comes across a bunch of guys and they see him glowing. He's just glowing,
right? Yeah.
And they can see this in him, and they're like, "Are you a god?" And he's like, "No." "Are you a messenger from God?" "No." Are you a prophet? No. Are you a man? No. I am awake. And then I should have put a little guy with his...
Are you just a man? No.
No.
Then what are you?
Yeah,
I am awake.
Yeah.
From an identity one can have, from association with reality, through the idea of an identity that one can have, to just being awake and aware of that process that we have as humans to develop an identity and then identify with that self-image that we've developed and be offended if that self-image is disparaged and all of that. No, he's aware and awake to all the processes and is just here. And he has recovered the being mode. And it's not an insight of this or that, but what it is to be a human being. So, mindfulness, hope, is a set of insights that brings about a transcendent, transformative experience, and brought about by mindfulness revolution, and now today also, along with the mindfulness revolution occurring, a psychedelic revolution is occurring. Altered states of consciousness are increasingly being sought. Not just the crows that he mentioned.
Pretty much
dolphins do this with pufferfish.
Yeah, and pretty much
pass it around.
Anything that can eat rotten fruit.
That for sure. Reindeer eating Amanita muscaria mushrooms until they think they can fly, and they're trying to hop around everywhere. Cats and catnip, great example.
Well, and the feeling of more real than real, and then when you come back down, it's like like equivalently speaking, like when you're asleep, like you said, when you're dreaming, you interact with it as if it's real, but then you wake up and it's more real. Well, the next step is more real than real.
This is reality.
And when you come back down, there's the urge to like, well, like, how do I continually exist in that realness?
Yes. How can I tune myself to be closer to that and ever more in concert with, in that dance with?
And that would, that type of thing, that's the axial revolution within yourself,
recapitulated through the individual. Yes.
And then a lot of other people,
Plato's allegory,
a lot of other people created their different practices to get to that realer than real state. And we're doing it now with different psychedelics,
sure,
and now clinically and scientifically, opposed to just hanging out in a house and calling yourselves
using it therapeutically and psychotherapeutic.
Well, and you can make measurements, and you can see so the information is very tightly coupled with itself. Like you can see an individual, how much you give them, how much water they have, their heart rate, all this other stuff. Have a trained person that can move them through these experiences.
And they're seeing high 60 to 80% recidivism rates from addictions, post-healing of actual healing, integrating, understanding of, and at the very depth of very traumatic experiences as well that people go through. So the legitimate curing of PTSD in a high rate of individuals and addictions and so forth. The therapeutic setting is powerful, and when combined with meditative and mindfulness practices, you really do, I believe, ratchet up the power of these plant medicines, which I believe to be sacraments. I believe that we should approach these things with a sense of reverence, as something sacred.
Yeah, drug abuse isn't using drugs; it's abusing drugs, kids.
For sure.
Yeah,
right. Indeed. So we have these terms of Satori and Shunyati in Buddhism,
and Sati,
Moksha and Vedanta.
And then the Sati state, which that I am awake is the I guess state, the ultimate state we should shoot for, is the being awake.
Yeah,
like
to live in ever greater contact and that dance of relevance, realization, and
it's the
reciprocal knowing and relation with reality.
It's the highest understanding you can have of your reality, because we're seeking to understand and participate within our reality.
It's the highest level of meaningfulness, and it also is the most generative of symbiotic states of being with one another in our larger communities and within ourselves.
And not a stationary state either. The idea of the state, it's not like this plateau you're at. You move through it.
Yeah.
And, perhaps you could even fall out of it.
Right. Well, we're initiating radical transformative practices to be able to deepen this insight and this capacity for being in this state of non-duality. So Sufism, Christian mystics have gotten into this, Kabbalists got into this, everybody, all of the ancient wisdom schools understood this capacity that human beings have. It puts us in the highest state of communion, potential for co-creation, potential for harmony, resonance, higher levels of being.
Just think about how profound of a concept to come across as, like, if, say, imagine in a world where you didn't have the idea of higher states of consciousness, and then awakening into that realization there are higher states of consciousness. And, well, we formed religions and practices around this.
Yeah, because when you look at the ineffable, like the people that left the cave in Plato's allegory, and they see the sun, this thing that gives all the life and the growth and the creation and the potential of this planet and this existence, they actually see that this is the true light. This is, and you can't even look at it. It's so overwhelmingly bright. That's our sense of the ineffable. We cannot quite get to that edge.
And we all we have the capacity of having these higher states of consciousnesses. We
can experientially.
Every single person can do it. Not everybody does do it, but we all can do it.
We can. Everybody has access to this.
Well, and I think
universally available.
The invention of beautiful churches and mosques and stuff like that is one way to help the people who go to that church get into that
That's what
higher state of consciousness.
Yeah, to
that
be in fellowship together in that transcendent communion together.
Yeah, because big beautiful churches aren't big and just big and beautiful because
It's like philosophy is the fellow practice of wisdom together. The love of wisdom and fellowship is the practice of philosophy. It requires other people. We are social beings, so it's an inner process and it's an outer process at once. Again, over and over. I like this idea of the realer than real, and it reminded me of that term that they had in the movie Cloud Atlas. You ever see that?
Yeah.
The true.
Yeah, the true.
That sounds very Taoist to me. I like that.
Well, there's the concept of there's what's true and then what's actually true.
Mm-hmm.
In that sense, the true.
Yeah, it had different connotations.
The real true
at different points is really powerful.
You ain't bullshitting me, are you? No, it's true.
No, it's the true.
So, awakening, recovery, and insight are tied together.
Mm-hmm.
This little
recovering, meaning, gaining insights, awakening. They're tied together in a dance, and this flowing state that we can achieve is increasing our sense of meaningfulness in life. So the insight, making sense of coherence. That's an interesting word.
Because when you're incoherent, like you've been knocked incoherent, you can no longer make sense.
You're tuned out.
You can no longer make sense.
You're not able to make things
coherent. Or
coherent.
People can't make sense of you.
Yeah.
So coherent would...
coherence is like tuning right into that spot.
Well, and if something's coherent, it makes sense. Like your argument is coherent. I made your argument make sense.
Together.
I may not agree, but
structural,
it makes sense.
Functional, organizational sense.
Yes.
It chimes when you're really hitting it. So making meaning. Ineffable experiences allow us to optimize our capacity for making sense, and that capacity for making sense allows us to be meaning makers ever more, increasing our capacity to solve this meaning crisis. Significant decreases exist. What did I write here? I don't know.
It's incoherent.
This is incoherent. this sentence is lacking coherence. Okay, we experienced a significant increase or decrease in stress, existential stress.
Oh yeah, well, it's
when
we like meaning. We like things to make sense
and capacity for transcendence, and tuning the two of those together to find that middle path. And continually optimizing and being attentive to that middle path. It's a very loving process. It's a very careful, full of care kind of process.
Yeah.
Interested. It's that interrelation with the divine, the law of bestowal, the law of reception. Well, we become the law of bestowal and we give back unto the source of bestowal itself. And we complete the circuit. Now we're one with the divine. Even as it lives through us, we're giving that experience back to us. So it's giving us experience, we're receiving it, we give it back. Consciously, with a sense of love and reverence and gratitude. And the actual, this is the experience that you created, oh mysterious, wondrous universe.
Now the question is,
God, source, all, one, whatever you want to call it.
The deepest question is, why did God?
Why is
if it is true, there's an omniscient deity that's the only one at its level. Why that created everything in the universe? Why?
And then beyond that is Hinduism and the other schools. They even delineate this beyond that highest level entity. That has a personality to it in a sense. There is, and then personalities below it, but beyond that is the absolute, and that absolute is that always has been, always will be, pure, generative, pure love. God knows what that is, but that's another layer.
That's correct. God knows.
The transcended. God knows. Only God knows. The absolute. Only the absolute knows. And God, of course, is synonymous with that thing, but God is also the personified aspect of that thing.
Yeah, well, it helps to have an interface to interact with, and we like ones that either work mechanically with us or look like us.
Yeah.
If you have a personal robot, you'd probably want it to be humanoid, not some like.
Yeah, one is fixated on the idea of there not being a god because they're still burned by the institutionalized church's version of the Christian story and enactment of the religio.
Yeah, even just the idea that the man sitting in the clouds with the finger
don't forget
thing.
The music of the spheres. You can still have a sense of wonder for this thing, and the idea of God can be much bigger than just a guy on a cloud in the sky. That's judgmental.
That's not the eidos of the structural functional organization. That's just a metaphor we use to point at something that, because like you can't define the eidos of God omega, because we can't see everything. This omnipresent,
infinite source of love and wisdom and existence and reality itself.
And all the wrath and evil and everything else that's in the world too.
Everything's the yin and the yang. Yeah, well, you can't have up without down. You can't have the light without dark. You can't have love without the symptoms of the lack thereof, and so forth.
If you take the yin yang and you spin it, it creates a double nested toroid.
Toroids.
So it's a donut. So
nice.
So God is
God
is the ultimate donut, because it has a donut ring like that's the small ring on the inside.
The black hole where it meets itself and then it comes and turns back inside out, and so
it does it doubly too. So
it's like a figure 8 in 3D.
Yeah, it's not even just like this. It's like this with another one of these things that's small inside of it. So that's the in and the out too.
It is,
so it's a double donut.
So it's 2 donuts, one on top of the other. So it's
Well, no, it's inside of
it's
each
a
other.
It's a figure 8 in 3D.
It's
but it's not even that.
There's some cool. There's some
open at the same time.
There's some cool animations.
I've seen them. Yeah,
and
awesome.
I've seen a guy. Can't find the video anymore because it gets scrubbed from YouTube or taken off the internet or whatever they do.
I've
but
seen this when stars explode. Like there's initially that.
There's a guy who does this with plasma. Like in little jars with certain magnet arrays and stuff like that, and he'll create these shapes, and he'll tie them to like what certain stellar and other phenomenon we see with it looks like. And the idea is it isn't everything is basically has a north side and a south side, potential wise, but it's not a bar magnet. It's actually 2 bowl shaped magnets where like the inside is north on one and then the outside is south on the other, but then the outside is north on one and the inside south, so they're inverse of each other with each other moving around and different sizes. And actually the orbital theories are not orbital theories for that, for atoms, instead of being this orbital theory but like Bleb orbital theory, he can replicate the shape of atoms in plasma as well using these bowl-shaped magnets. Is really, really weird, but yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
And that's just, that's in the, I guess, the physical aspect of the universe, but I would assume that the mind and spirit aspect of the universe also has similar patterns discreetly tucked within it.
Mm-hmm. Well, this source of infinite, this source of omnipresence, whatever it is, I once heard this theory. I think it was Nassim Haramein that proposed that there's a singularity at the center of everything. So back to the toruses, at the center of every atom, there's a singularity. You get to this point where the closer you get, the more information there is. So it's like a collapsing of a black hole that then perhaps expresses out on another side in another universe.
I've heard that. I'm not a big fan of that one.
I don't know how it works, but that idea of that torus at the center of everything, being perhaps what generates gravitational force that holds us together, holds every atom together. It's why it attracts all of the stars and everything around every star. It's because every star has a singularity in the center of it. Every atom, it's so it just goes down and it goes all the way up, perhaps to the entire universe.
I think we are looking for a center point to something like within an atom. We thought, okay, well, the nucleus is that, but then
that's
the
why
nucleus
I've heard it described as an atom is like a pinprick through a hole through time and space.
I think it's potential,
It's potential.
that actualizes itself, because the electron
it's
is just
emergence.
a potential.
Yeah, and we don't know what emergence is, but emergence, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and the further down you go, you know, like we've tried to think, you know, like quarks, which quark theory works really well for, like, you know, dealing with like real life, but I don't think that's perfect either. You know, and quarks can have, you know, up spin, down spin, left spin, right spin, charm spin, and strange. And that's the best way to think about it is like, you know, up, this would be down spin because the way you're looking at it's down spin. Up spin would be this way. Strange spin, I think, is more like this. And then charm is the other way. But it's just how a potential expresses itself with other things as well. So like the spin, when you measure it, it's only in that position when you measure it, but moment. Then there's an equal chance it can be in the down spin
So it's
position the next
matrix.
Time. Yeah, so every time you do it, you'll get a different result.
Yeah, it's shortened.
So I think it's just collapsing potentials. Potentials collapsing down and in groups, and you know, the more things you get together, the more they make what we seem as solid, and potential goes actual. But there's, you know, the further you go in, the problem is we don't have the ability to measure that, so we can't look at it. And then with our minds, when we go in through math, there's a point where the math breaks too. There's the smallest point that you can't get any smaller than in math, in any measurement, in anything else. There's that point. And then they're smaller than that. Yeah,
they're still going to be smaller than that. Yeah, you can't get past it. So yeah, if it really is a singularity, if it really is infinite in as it is out, then the whole thing really is.
I guess you could call it a singularity, but it wouldn't be like endless. The singularity inside of an atom. It would be the potential for something to happen, the singular potential to happen. And then, well, have you ever heard of the shared electron theory? Like there's only one electron in the universe, and it's just sharing its potential with every other atom.
I like that.
It's a fun one to get into.
Well, everything is just this interconnected thing. There is just this one universe.
Well, how do you explain the quantum entangling, where you can entangle two? Well,
it's
technically one particle, but it's split
through itself. Yeah, it's hard to imagine, but there's like this field of potential that is everywhere at once, and always has been and always will be. And so there's no matter of traveling between one point and another point. Those points are existing within this field of what everything from Taoism to Buddhism to Christianity recognizes as something that is ultimately absolutely aware and loving. And that's beautiful.
God, I hope it is. Because, you know, if this is one of those things where you die and it's just like a hell afterlife and there is no like anything else, it's, oh, nope, you go to hell and you get thrown in the recycler and we grind you up for eternity and then spit you back out for no reason.
For hundreds of years have been coming back unassociated from one another and telling the same stories, where it's very much that sense of ultimate belonging and oneness and real.
No, I have faith, but I like to giggle about it, and I like stories of like,
I
went to hell.
To be intellectually aware of it and to really directly experience it to the point of grokking it and it being realer than real, like for real within oneself. That recognition, those are two different things.
Well, imagine like
we can't have that experience, and that's so wonderful.
Imagine if, like, say in the psychedelic realm, you can have a realer than real experience, but you were not in a place where it was a comfortable, felt loving experience, and it was in the negative frame.
Oh, sure. That can happen.
And that's also where it's like...
That's why it's so important
you can prep your mind before going...
Prep your set and setting.
And also your understanding.
And the setting, the environment you're going to be in.
I've never had a bad trip, and I've had bad things happen around me and to myself on trips.
You got to be around people you absolutely trust. You don't want any unpredictable things happening. It's got to be a controlled environment that's safe.
Screw all that stuff. You yourself have to be mentally fortified.
That's what I'm saying. Mindset and the setting you're in.
Yeah.
So the mind. Yeah, I was just agreeing with that. That's where the term set and setting comes from. You should always work on your set and setting if you're going to engage in a practice like this, and so that you can be in the most healthy psychological state, like not having come out of any breakups or traumatic experiences recently.
Even beyond that, having
psychotechnologies, practices
yeah,
of meditation,
and
come into it
training,
prayerfully, reverentially, with a sense of
well,
sacred.
that's what your medicine man was supposed to do. They were supposed to help you, like,
I think
initiate
that
you
takes
into
it to a
this,
whole
and
other level.
you know,
And I think that's the next wave, I hope, for people, because
well,
people are just going out and doing these things for fun or curiosity or to work on something in particular. That's all well and good, but there's a whole other level
yeah.
of transcendent communion and deep, deep, life-changing, transformative realizations that can occur.
Yeah.
Radical shifts.
And there's dangers with it. So, like everything, even
things should be used wisely and legally, always as possible. And
well, and also you don't want to
guidance.
You don't want to
and
build your
in
ego.
a safe place. And
you
these
want to
things can
diminish the
magnify
ego.
the ego.
Oh, yeah.
You got to understand, like, just like life can everything in life can magnify our egos.
It can also.
These are super powerful tools that really heighten our access to awareness, to consciousness, and the constant creative playfulness of reality itself. And engagement with these things should not be approached lightly by any means. They should be approached as something truly sacred. And I think if you develop a ritual around it,
and also
come to
watch
them
out
that
with
way.
dependency too, because too many times I've
Yeah.
heard I can't become spiritual. Like, I only feel spiritual when I do this, and they're not.
No, they're just there to open the window.
It's not
to
food.
the spiritual
It's
life.
medicine.
Yeah, it's medicine.
Not food.
Yes.
Eat food for
Yes.
food, but
Well,
it's
people make
medicine.
we do this in everything. We do this
Like-
a lot in life. We're mistaken the having mode for the being mode again.
Well,
here, aren't we?
and like what John Vervaeke's talking about and what we're talking about doing, this is food, and then we use the medicine to continue the healing. But the food nourishes, it grows us,
yes.
and then the medicine helps us expand us. So,
Yes. Yeah, so we're
and-
not going
and-
into total self-denial, and we're not going into
and you don't necessarily need to use substances either to
Total
get there, because
reliance
certain foods will make you feel
addictiveness.
certain
Yeah.
ways.
everything is
so-
psychedelic. These are particularly potent aspects of reality. But I mean, me talking right now is affecting your mind. That is mind expanding. Everything that we ingest, see, hear, taste, eat, literally, is affecting our minds. The chemicals of the foods that we eat affect how much water we have in our system is affecting our mind
The
state.
ritual of
Everything is
the
psychedelic.
ritual of eating
There
at
are
certain
magical fruits that are very go ahead on the ritual.
the ritual of eating foods
Mm-hmm.
at certain times with people, just doing that. That's a ritual that
That's a
builds
life-affirming
bonding,
practice.
that makes you feel better, rises you up, lifts you together. And if you incorporate that with
The eating and sharing together is a very peacemaking situation too, because food is something that we will fight over when there's not enough around. So, like in poor places, the way that people will come together and commune and pray and treat the food and each other as sacred, and then all share equally, even if they have just one bowl of rice together, is part of that ritual. That treating this life-giving food as something sacred, and treating each other as something sacred. Yeah.
But yeah, so thinking about these things and doing these things, that's the food. And then going deeper into having an enlightening experience is the medicine.
Yes.
So every day you should be consuming food, and then you should also be taking your medicine, whether it's going deep into your meditation or movement practices, that end to lift you up into these. But you can't always be in a transcending experience. You can't live your life that way, but you can get yourself as close as possible in this nice, perfect balance, which is the food. And
and which you can be in a transcendent, it just deepens and deepens. One
Actually,
can be in a transcendent state
so-
while observing the body operate normally in the world.
we eat bread and drink wine in the Christian.
But you don't have to stay up on the mountain, that's for sure.
In the Christian religion, we eat bread and drink wine for communion. Well, and the bread is supposed to be the body. It nourishes the body. It's the things that nourish the existence, and then the wine is the sacrament that, if you drink enough of it, does the head stuff. But in the sense of that's the medicine. You've got the body of what you need to be a well-rounded individual that has a good firm grasp of reality, and then you have the medicine on top that keeps helps you build out and above and outward, up and out.
Yes.
It's just interesting, it's like, well, why bread and wine? What's with that? It's a weird death cult. You're eating your
Well, in
deity.
ancient times, we know that they infused the wines in
Oh,
these
yeah,
regions
yeah,
with
yeah,
different plant medicines.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until the last few 5, 6, 7 centuries that these were being outlawed in various nations over time. And I think the last law regarding psychedelics and brews was in Germany, that was taken out whatever root or some psychedelic root or whatever it was that was still in some of the beer that they were drinking. But
Well,
it's an ancient practice, and they've even found traces of the various substances in like vases and things like that they found in ancient Egyptian through on up to now. So these were deeply a part of our worshipful practices, and treating them that way. And as you mentioned, we must be wary of over-reliance and addiction and fixation. We must utilize these things and treat them as holy. They're there to help us open the door to have major, radical, transformative shifts, or soft, slow awakenings into that deep, abiding state of oneness with the in and the outward, the phasing in and the up and the down, and all of these processes at once, being in that middle path, the attenuation, the optimization of that process. All of these things, it's how we orient ourselves towards it. So whether it be our practice of meditation or a practice of using a plant medicine, I think these things should be married together, and we'll be there much closer to riding that line.
it's all about the inward direction. Outward,
Intward, yes.
Intward.
Yeah, it's the union of the in and the out.
Well, and
That's the yin and the yang, because it's not just the two interrelated opposites. These have a piece of one and the other, and they're also the whole circle and the squiggly line.
oh, which way are you
It's
going?
one thing.
I'm going that way.
Yeah, right.
Intward. What?
Intward.
Oh boy.
Intward ho.
Yes,
Let's
Intward
go.
ho. Well, next episode will be a continue Intward.
Deepening our explorations, our journeys through this awakening from the meaning crisis, journeys into outward, intward.
Intward. I like that. I'm gonna.
Yeah, I
I'm
like
gonna
that.
start
That's
using it
gonna
all the
be-
time, like it's actually a word.
That's gonna be
So
an
people
actualized
are like,
shirts. Slogan on a
Intward.
shirt.
Yes, and it's
INTWARD, right?
yeah. So if you combined it like the T of out and
Yeah, and the N is like can be an upside down U, like, and the I can have like a circle around it, so you can make it like a torus for the U.
well, you know, in is a 2-letter word, out is a 3-letter word. Just stick N over top of it.
Intward.
Intward we go.
Intward we go
Ho.
into our awakening flow.
Huh.
We row our boats down this river flow. Whoops, I wrote intwad instead of intward. There we go.
If you're French, Intwad.
Don't be an intwad. All right, intwads.
Yeah.
Actualizers, phase shifters, transcenders, meaning makers. We're going to sign off now. I know it's getting late. This has been a long one. Where are we at?
Oh.
3 hours officially.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, another 3-hour episode. Thank you guys so much
boy.
for tuning in and joining us on this episode of Actuali podcast covering John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. It's such a mouthful.
How about we just call it Wednesday night? Thanks for joining
Wednesday
us on
Night
Wednesday
Live.
night.
Actuali Live. Love you guys. Talk to you soon.
Meow.